Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 721. The Boy That Turned Down the Council President. As the instructor concluded the briefing with final instructions on how the students would be departing the island later in the day, he stepped down from the podium. The other instructors followed him, filing out of the hall without another word. The moment they left, the room came alive with movement. Students quickly formed clusters, their voices overlapping as they exchanged hurried conversations. Northern stood still, his gaze sweeping across the hall, noting how groups of four naturally began to emerge from the larger crowd. Humans are quick to act. It was slightly amusing to watch, but just like them, he also had to act. Northern exhaled softly. As he was about to turn, someone approached him. A student with rough brown hair and a vibrant face, highlighted by the little freckles that caressed his cheeks. The boy beamed with an arrogant look in his eyes. "You look tough. Want to join our team?" He pointed over his shoulder, where two others stood together. There was something similar about the two of them that Northern could see instantly. They too were being ostracized like the non-combative school, even though they wore uniforms of the combative school. They stood together, their hands tensely clenched in front and heads bowed, while they tentatively stole glances toward their teammates' direction. Northern then took another look at the boy, this time in a different light. The boy indeed perfectly portrayed himself to be a tough and confident individual, and he was probably as strong as he was trying to look. Northern appreciated the effort, but if he was going to follow him, he would follow only him. The other two terribly made his value as a choice drop. Northern smiled and said in a very polite tone, "I appreciate the effort despite seeing that I am a member of the non-combative school." The freckled boy's smile beamed even more vibrantly, his eyes optimistic, no definite of a positive response. "But I am sorry, I cannot join your team." The boy's eyes narrowed slightly as if trying to process what he'd just heard. His confident demeanor faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What? You're turning me down?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. He crossed his arms, his freckled cheeks darkening slightly. Whether from embarrassment or irritation, Northern couldn't tell. "Do you even realize what you're saying? I mean, you're from the non-combative school. This isn't exactly an everyday offer." He paused, clearly expecting Northern to reconsider. However, Northern just stared at him blankly. The boy scoffed lightly, his earlier grin twisting into something sharper. "Look, I was just trying to help you out. Not many people are willing to team up with, well, your kind. You should have jumped at this chance." The boy took a step back, shaking his head like Northern had made the worst decision of his life. "Fine. Suit yourself. But don't come running to me when you realize what a mistake you've made." Northern sighed and turned the other way. Astor threw his hand in the air, waving as their eyes met. In that instant, he approached Northern with the other two Starchasers who had been going through a crucible of redefinition for a couple of nights. The boys' expressions were normal, in fact joyous. No one would have any idea how much they had been broken, how much dread and despair they masked in their faces. They really are obedient to the letter. This was because Northern had strictly informed them on the last night to show up looking their best. He had not expected such an impressive result, but he was amazed by it. It proved to him that the idea of breaking people really worked well. Loyalty that is freely given by someone is dangerous as it can be taken away. I can be betrayed by anyone. It's best not to create a chance of it happening. Northern smiled, satisfied with his choice. Astor finally reached his front and flashed a little smile. The tension from earlier that morning had disappeared. After hearing the details of the contest, he suddenly felt very confident that he was with Northern. "Several people have been approaching me, telling me to join their team. Someone from the student union even asked me, Man, I was almost tempted, but no cohort will be able to beat ours. I am confident of it. If I join somewhere else, I will just be losing. Astor's eyes glowed with a confident and assertive light. Then the glow dimmed as his expression contorted into a scowl. But the most annoying thing is those bastards talk as if they are doing me a favor. The ideology that goes around their heads. They think they own this school. I will shatter it this week and write a new history in the academy. Astor's slant eyes brightened. He smiled heartily. Don't worry. I will make sure we are not a hindrance to you. Northern looked at him coldly. Then his gaze drifted to the other two. They shivered slightly. Of course. You wouldn't even dare. The four of them, along with other students who had formed parties, began to leave the hall. As Northern approached the entrance, someone touched him slightly from behind. He turned back to see who it was and was slightly surprised. You? Ups. The familiar girl looked at Northern with a lively expression climbing her face. Then she added, Would you like to join my cohort? The faces of the three students behind the lady broke apart and paled. But Your Highness, we are already complete? The girl with large eyes, whom Northern had seen before, protested on behalf of everyone. But the council president did not seem to care. She tilted her head slightly, waiting for Northern's response. The thing was, the moment the student council approached a student of the non-combative school, everyone was already staring and muttering. Huh? Who is he? Damn. He is so lucky. The council president is ever so benevolent. The council president is an amazing person really. But dang, I wish I was him. Northern heard some of the mutterings. Some were too low to be heard. He sighed after his short pause and looked at the president with a straight face. I'm sorry, President. I already have a team. What? The girl with the large eyes was the one who responded, with intense shock. Her shock began to ripple across the crowd. Why would anyone in their right minds refuse the president's offer? He's a fool, that's for sure. Forget losing. This dude is arrogant, he's gonna die in the rift. And on, the students kept muttering, slowly dismissing themselves. Everyone on the president's team was equally as shocked as the large-eyed girl. Of course, they did not look forward to getting replaced, but none of them could understand it either. The boy with auburn hair and heterochromatic eyes stepped forward, a corner of his lips twitching. Boy, maybe you don't understand. Alita is the strongest drifter in this school. She is the student council president. Northern stared at them indifferently and gave the same response. I understand that, but I am fine on my own. He turned and walked away with his cohort. It was very difficult for the vice president to erase the shock on his face. Are students of the non-combative school usually this stupid? Chapter 722. The Departure. An array of identical airships floated close to the academy walls, each one slowly drifting towards the center, lowering itself beside the foldable bridge. These airships paled in comparison to the one Northern had boarded to the academy, both the first and second time. Those were built with the capacity to take 500 passengers, while these could only take 100. 10 of them lined up in front of the academy. Students walked on the bridge and climbed aboard their assigned ships. When the 7th ship came into place, Northern and his cohort also boarded. It didn't matter whether one was joining the contest or not. Every student was mandated to leave. Of course, it wasn't compulsory, but they would be missing a lot. Northern couldn't help but think about Alina and her stubborn, rage-fueled banter with the forge master. A few hours before the ships arrived, he had gone to pay her a visit at her quarters. When he couldn't find her there, he made his way to the private forge, but she wasn't there either. He really hated having to go to the general forge. It had been a very long time since he last visited, but he had no choice. As Northern entered the smithy, he heard heated arguments between Alina and the head forge master. This is madness. Why won't you talk to the principal about this? The man sat in front of a furnace, staring deeply into the fire with an expression that held many cautions, secrets, and fatigue. He sighed and responded after seconds of silence. It is not my place to meddle with the affairs of the academy. They made their choice. I am an instructor here like every other person. My relationship with the principal does not give me any excuse nor privilege to interfere in matters like this. Alina lowered her head, her bangs darkening her eyes. She bit her lips fiercely, then lingered in silence before saying, "You are wicked and nonchalant. You lost one hand in just the side effect of the brewing war, and you won't do anything to stop the principal from making a dangerous decision like this." She raised her head, her eyes flaring with flames of anger. A revolution is literally boiling in the central continent. Some mad soldier rose to conquer the continent for himself, and every damn person is shrugging it off as insignificant because they haven't seen what the war has done to people. You have seen it, you were there. I mean, look at you, forging is impossible for you. But you're still gonna turn a blind eye to this? Make me understand. I am not turning a blind eye to it, Ili. I have informed this to him as a friend. As an instructor of the academy, I am necessitated to comply like every other person. Alina stood there, staring at the forge master, her eyes trembling. You know, from when I was little until now, I've never felt proud that you're my father. The whole continent may consider you a legend, but you're just a bastard who leaves his scent everywhere you go. You could have stopped my mother from leaving if you wanted to, but this is the attitude you've had. She stormed out, pausing for a beat as she reached Northern. A small frown folded her features as she said to him, "If you know what's good for you, do not go off this island." Then she bounced out of the forge on her crutches. The entire place was left in an awkward silence. No one was there except the forge master and Alina. Northern had a feeling that even he wasn't supposed to be there, and so he slowly withdrew. He wanted to approach Alina after that time, but he had nothing to do or say to her. The conversation was going to be very awkward, and the thought of it alone made him detest it. So he decided to leave the academy without speaking to her, hoping to see her again. He could not fully understand her anger, but he could try to. Whatever battle they were caught in had been so dangerous that the forge master and she suffered irreparable damages. Her fears about the students venturing into such a place were well understood. But what made the entire situation a bit confusing and difficult to look into was the nature of Alina and the forge master's banter. It seemed there had been an underlying issue before this event. Alina's argument seemed to lean towards it more than it was about the students being allowed to venture into the heart of the continent. Northern shrugged as he entered the ship. "I'm sure everything will be fine. I am here after all." A few minutes later, the last person boarded, and the ship slowly rose away from the bridge and drifted towards the middle of the red cloud, slowly making its way towards the edge of the island marked by a thick, usually green forest that was now covered in snow. Northern stared down from the ship's rail. He looked at the forest and looked back at the academy where there was no snow at all. Ha! This was the first time he was noticing something like this. "You are just noticing it?" Astor asked with a small smile on his lips. His sleepy eyes glanced over the red clouds. "They say snow doesn't fall on the academy because of that thing." Northern tilted his head slightly. "Really? What is it? What does it do?" Astor shrugged with his hands. "I have no idea really, but I know it's one of the 9 wonders of the continent and visitation is not allowed. I think rain doesn't fall either because of it." Northern frowned a little bit towards the sea of crimson cloud, remembering the last tough battle he had fought. The eyes the creature had all over its hand and the eyes that glared back at him from the depths of the crimson cloud had a very striking resemblance. Very ominous. Chapter 723. The Arrival, Part 1. After boarding the airship, the duration of their journey took almost as long as Northern was used to, or perhaps even less. He had things to do on the ship, people to watch, and sleep to catch, so he did not pay much attention to how long it took. "I've been sleeping too much recently." Northern waited at the front of the deck. His eyes focused as the ship took a slow and careful dive towards the port. It moved with such measured care that people did not have to worry about sliding off its wooden deck. Prematures, of course, held onto the ship's rails nonetheless. Before the 7th ship landed, 6 others had landed before it at the same port, and the students had been received by the entourage of high nobility in the kingdom of Variolania. As the ship settled on the high platforms, a small mass of people in noble attire waited on the ground, conversing amongst themselves. The instructors on the ship gave a few words of maintenance and warning before the students slowly disembarked and descended to meet their escorts. Upon reaching the nobles, the two instructors who served as guards and guides for the 7th group of 100 students bowed and paid their respects to the officials. Not much could be heard about what they discussed, at least not from Northern's position clustered far behind amidst many other students. If he wanted to know, he probably could. But what good was it? That was called eavesdropping. Rather than wasting his time on things like that, Northern had better things to do. Come to think of it, I have never really been inside the country. Northern lived on the outskirts of the state capital. Although his father had gone into the city several times to purchase things, Northern had no clear memory of being there. Not even once. So in a way, even though this was his kingdom of birth, well, this was Northern's first time entering the kingdom of Verulania. After a few moments, the instructors began to lead the students carefully into the city. No carriages were used. Everyone marched forward slowly on foot, flanked by several soldiers who guarded them left and right, preventing the line of students from leaking outside a particular radius or preventing the crowd of onlookers from approaching the students recklessly. Order was surprisingly maintained as they moved forward, while the citizens of the nation watched the students as if they were gazing at celestials, lights of hope and pride glowing beautifully in their eyes. The city was exalted and marked with spires of brown roof. There was a particular accent of structure that noted the entire architecture of the land, making it vastly different from all others Northern had visited. Actually, now that he thought about it, other cities weren't too far off. Take Sierra, for example, with their appealing yet strange structures of wood. Never-ending wood. Arcadia and its cat-holistic air. It was quite obvious that the influence of the Church of Constellation was heavy, even though it was the closest to what many would call a free city. And the Dark Continent. Lewingard also had its structure. He was sure Riemgard and several other cities would too. It was what forged their personality. Each kingdom, no matter how small, had a sturdy root buried in the depth of history, with Riemgard being the strongest, deepest, and fairest of them all. Then the clans. The making of individualistic values in the stony pages of history. It would have taken an exemplary, legendary, and magnifying human to create a legacy that only nations could create. It was why clans were so valued and respected. Even though many only basked in the greatness of their ancestors, underestimating and daring them was a reckless attitude with a tremendous price anyone would want to avoid paying. After a while, the students arrived at an estate. Compared to the other city buildings, the estate carried an air of difference, almost like a foreigner amidst other structures, stared at with strange awe by the piercing spires of several buildings. The buildings in the estate maintained more calm and nominal structures. Flat roofs and sharp edges, almost like every other building that was not significant. But there was precision in the details with which they were built. They exuded a foreign beauty, and even though so simple as a structure in a medieval world could be, the arrayed collection of them exuded an ambience of luxury. As expected of royalty, they'll splurge money on another and make it look good. Northern observed several things about the place. The paintings and designs of the structures were new. The roads were too neat to have existed all the while. This probably indicated that this was a rapidly built or renovated place to host the students. I wonder if the academy had to spend a lot of money, or if the kingdom agreed to do it for a favor in return. Getting owed by Milgard Academy, anyone would probably kill for the chance. It was no surprise to see nobles diligently giving their best to escort students. Through all of this, Northern could see clearly the value that the academy truly possessed. It was a powerhouse in and of itself, no doubt about it. All this realization, however, made him grin maliciously. All the more interesting it will be when I stand on top of it and crush it before his very eyes. Northern had never expected world domination. He wasn't interested in vainglory and certainly not in being praised by humans driven by fickle and insignificant emotions. What he wanted only was Ruffsburg. Oh, to rise to the top of his treasured land and crumble it to pieces right before his eyes. This was the only gesture of welcome gift Northern could think of for the man who had uprooted him from his family and sent him to a land of dread to suffer. The bastard had even specially sent him into a rift. Ruffsburg was out for his throat. I'm sure a little school won't be too much of a price to pay. Chapter 724. The Arrival, Part 2. Every student was assigned to a room, each building in the estate like a mansion of its own, equipped with 50 opulent chambers. While many students were lodged in the estate's innermost buildings, the later arrivals were placed in two central edifices that mirrored one another, one to the right and the other to the left of the estate's core. Between these twin structures stood an awe-inspiring monument, a colossal slab of metal that stretched skyward, its surface glinting faintly in the sunlight. The structure resembled the blade of a titanic sword, as though it had been thrust out of the earth by a hand of unimaginable power. The hilt and crossguard were hidden beneath the ground, their presence hinted at by the subtle contours etched into the surrounding stone. The air around the monument was heavy with an unspoken reverence, as though it held secrets of an ancient age, a legacy both somber and unyielding. It was a silent sentinel, a reminder of something long past, yet deeply significant to the present. Students passing by couldn't help but slow their steps, their gazes drawn to the towering relic. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some in awe, others speculative, as if they could unravel the mysteries buried beneath the ground. Northern found himself staring as well. The visual of the sword was regal before his eyes, reflecting the dawning light of the day-star with a brilliant radiance. There was something magnetic about its presence, an ancient strength that seemed to radiate from the rusted surface. You know, they say this monument actually qualified to become one of the wonders of the world. Astor's voice rang in his ears, pulling him out of his thoughts. He turned a little as the chatterbox stood next to him, arms crossed and grinning as he stared at the monument with unbridled enthusiasm. Many claim that a giant died standing after winning a Pyrrhic victory. His body never fell no matter how much people tried to pull it down. Ages upon ages, the ground level rose until most of his body was buried in it, leaving only the rusted metal. Northern raised a brow, his expression blank but his disbelief evident. Really? He proceeded to give Astor a dubious look, tilting his head slightly as if to emphasize his skepticism. What? Don't look at me like that. I did not make it up, Astor replied indignantly, crossing his arms defensively. Northern rolled his eyes away, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips as he shifted his gaze back to the towering slab of metal. Sure, Astor, he drawled, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Astor huffed, his voice rising slightly. What's with that tone? I swear I'm not lying. I'm just repeating what I heard. Legends don't need to make sense. They're meant to be mysterious. Mysterious, huh? More like someone's overly creative imagination running wild. Northern shook his head as a quiet chuckle escaped his lips. You can doubt the story all you want, but that doesn't mean it's not true. Giants are real, you know? Northern gave him another skeptical glance, this time laced with amusement. I'll take your word for it, Chatterbox. Astor grumbled under his breath but couldn't suppress a grin. You will. Just wait until you see something that'll make you believe. Then you'll owe me an apology. The spell of the monument broke as the instructors' voices resounded, sharp and commanding, pulling the students back to reality. The crowd began to shift, murmurs turning into obedient movements as they were divided into teams. Northern and Astor, along with two others, were assigned to the left wing of the monumental sword. Their group quietly moved into the assigned building, the grandeur of its design lost on Northern, who was already growing weary. Once inside, Northern did what he needed most: he slept. The instructors had granted them time to rest, an unspoken mercy considering the exhausting journey. For Northern, sleep came quickly, his mind dulled by the weight of his thoughts and the quiet hum of the estate around him. The other ships had yet to arrive, and with them more students. Much later, in the depth of the night, the sound of a large bell tore through the air, its guttural toll reverberating like a storm. The gruesome sound rang in the ears of everyone, no matter how deep into the estate or into sleep they were. Luckily, or perhaps unluckily, Northern had been awake. He had just finished washing up, staring at his reflection in the small mirror on the wall, when the bell's toll froze him in place. It wasn't the sound itself that unsettled him. It was the weight of what it heralded. The sound of the bell was pretty obvious. Milwa Festival had officially begun. Following the sound, several students began to walk out of their assigned buildings to the center of the estate. For Northern and his cohort, they did not have to walk far. A few minutes later, they were already gathered around the monument again. Now that the darkness was prominent and the night was thick, cold bit at the skin of the students like invisible ferocious monsters with needle-like teeth. Many were dressed in casual clothing. Northern could see several cardigans, some with hoodies, some without, thick knitted sweatshirts. Many wore thick coats over it all and gloves, desperate to fight the cold with all possible means. Northern, however, wore just a casual shirt and trousers, although long-sleeved. Astor observed him for a few moments more. He had been observing him since they stepped out, hesitant to speak. He often forgot himself around Northern sometimes and went on yapping. It was the nature of the person he was, nothing could be done about that. But each time he remembered how oppressive those nights had been, he would reorganize himself again and return to the reclusive young boy that was there to fill the numbers. Finally letting go of his fear, he opened his mouth, clouds of smoke drifting out with his breath. "Is it that you do not feel any cold or do not have any cardigan?" Northern glanced at him, shrugging his shoulders with an indifferent look in his eyes. "Both. I see." Astor looked down somberly. The voice of the instructors once again permeated the crowd of 1,000 students with frightening loudness. There's no way they could have done it naturally. A voice amplification item had to have been used for their voice to be delivered at such high intensity. Was Northern's thought of so? The briefing was simple. Out of 1,000 students, only about 800 were participating in the festival contest, which meant they had about 200 teams. Each team was meant to challenge one rift each. The tier of rift they each would be challenging was V. This was to make everything equal and fair amongst students. Teams were expected to be a balanced ratio of soul ranks and talent class. Of course, the instructors could not control that enough. Many students would go on to form cohorts with people who were strong or who they liked. That was why they needed to sign a legal agreement anyway. The rules for the contest were mandatory. Not following them was a cost only the students would pay for. All 200 teams made their way to the warp portal, and each was sent to different locations where they would be challenging their rifts. Luckily for Northern, a high-grade warp portal was used to send him and his cohort, so he did not have any alert or suspicion-deriving problems and got to his location in peace. Several officials had made tent in front of the rifts. Immediately after they arrived, they signed a couple of papers, after which they ventured into the rifts. Northern had missed the smell of rifts. Chapter 725. An interesting battle. The sky was drained of color, black clouds moving slowly like shards of drifting darkness. The entire place, as far as Northern's eyes could see, sprawled with pitch-black jagged trees that resembled twisted echoes of what they once were. The ground didn't seem far different, dried and stripped of living essence. The rocks looked as if darkness had undergone sedimentation, and the horizon carried a gray cadence. Stepping into the gray realm, Astor shivered, assaulted by cold dread. There was cold. The weather was harsh and gnawed at his skin with freezing intensity, even though it was hidden beneath thick layers of fabric. Then the dread of such an empty and dark place assaulted his heart, causing him to breathe irregularly. His eyes widened and his heart thumped terribly. The other two showed the same reaction. Their eyes widened, trembling with blood-freezing fear. Northern gave them a strange look for a second and sighed. "You three just stay here, and don't go anywhere. I will be back before you start to miss my presence." Northern stared at them one more time, observing them with a chagrined look in his eyes. After that, what they saw made their eyes widen even more. Northern's form shimmered suddenly from their vantage point, a red light pooling around his frame. Then the light suddenly dispersed, creating a powerful gust of wind that almost blew them away. Then he flew. His flight was tender and almost unrealistic. His body lifted swiftly, almost as if the chains of gravitational force had been lifted from his body. He glanced back at them one more time and with a blur, not a blur, his body became an imperceptible shimmer of red light as it shot away and disappeared instantly before their eyes. Their mouths were left gaping. He flew. The boy with a bowl cut muttered. His small eyes expanded, almost falling out of their sockets. Aster had the same reaction. Flight was a complicated and different phenomenon. Although nothing was impossible for a drifter, it was very possible for a drifter to be capable of flight based on their abilities. But the problem here was that Northern was not. Aster had studied Northern from spending a few weeks with him. It was a suspicion at first but later grew to certainty. Northern's talent was being able to take and give talents. How and where did he see a flight talent? Aster was sure. There is no such talent in the academy. No single student capable of flying. None had appeared in the past 100 years. So how exactly could Northern fly? Aster was left confused and bothered about it. Northern's body drifted through the air at a low altitude, very close to the ground. He could feel the wind brushing against his body as he weightlessly flashed through the air with a thin crimson trail. It means that my body state is not affected by the name change. Didn't think I'd be able to fly after changing it. Northern, immediately after they stepped into the realm, had changed his name and afterward tried to see if he was going to be able to fly. Although he suspected it was not the case, he had often felt like everything about him was tied to his name. So, he almost expected it to be non-functional the moment he changed his name. However, his body was different. The growth and changes that had occurred in his body were not tied to his soul and hence his name, but rather his body alone. This should mean chaos should be accessible to me. Chaos was a force that resided in his body, while void resided in his soul, more tied to his name than chaos was. All his void abilities were slightly inaccessible, although he felt like if he tried well enough, he would be able to access them. However, having them slightly inaccessible did not bother him. In fact, it was good this way. Like this, he would be able to take full advantage of his new identity and the talent it gave to him. Finally, Northern sighted a creature. It was a single one. Strange. Usually, monsters came in flocks close to the rift entrance, but something seemed different about this one. Doesn't matter anyway. He was going to crush them with tremendous strength. The monster scurried forward furiously, its legs pounding on the ground with furious intensity, claws tearing up the desolate terrain with every stride. It resembled a grotesque amalgamation of a wolf and a lizard, its skin an ashen gray marred with glowing crimson veins. Its eyes, hollow and blood-red, radiated malice, and its gaping maw revealed rows of jagged teeth dripping with strange black ichor. Northern descended slightly, his body hovering just above the ground as his crimson trail dissipated. He tilted his head, observing the creature with mild interest. The beast snarled, its sound reverberating through the empty wasteland, and charged with terrifying speed. The beast's charge was a blur of aggression, its claws gouging deep furrows into the lifeless ground. Northern stood unmoving, his arms crossed, watching the creature approach with dispassionate eyes. When the monster finally leapt, its jaws opened wide, aiming to tear him apart in a single bite. Northern uncrossed his arms, letting out a breath. Boom! His fist connected with the beast mid-air, meeting its skull with an impact that echoed like a thunderclap across the gray realm. The creature's head caved inward, its body flung back like a broken doll. It crashed into the ground, sliding for several meters before finally coming to a halt, lifeless and crumpled. Northern straightened, his hands still extended from the punch. He flexed his fingers, the crimson aura around him pulsing faintly. Wow! His eyes were slightly widened, looking at his fist. But the moment of silence was short-lived. A distant rumbling rose from the horizon, the sound growing louder with every passing second. Northern narrowed his eyes and turned his gaze toward the source. The jagged trees on the horizon began to shake as a horde of monsters emerged, their numbers stretching far beyond what the eye could see. They came in all shapes and sizes, some resembling massive wolves, others towering like giants, their twisted forms a grotesque reflection of primal fury. Northern grinned. What the hell? Was that a scout? He released a pale smile and cracked his knuckles. The more the merrier, all right? The ground beneath his feet cracked as he took a single step forward. The monsters charged, their roars filling the air. A tidal wave of claws, fangs, and glowing red eyes rushing toward him. Northern moved. He shot forward like a cannonball, his fist colliding with the first monster in his path. The beast's body exploded into fragments, its limbs and ichor scattering like debris. Without pausing, Northern swung his leg, his kick striking another creature with such force that it was hurled backward into the horde, bowling over a dozen of its kin. A massive, lizard-like beast lunged at him from the side, its gaping maw snapping shut inches from his shoulder. Northern grabbed its jaw with one hand, his grip unyielding, and slammed it into the ground with a sickening crunch. The creature writhed, but he stomped down, shattering its skull into the dirt. The horde pressed closer, undeterred by the carnage. Northern pivoted, his movements fluid yet devastating. His fists were hammers, his kicks wrecking balls, each strike sending shockwaves that ripped through the monstrous tide. One particularly large creature, its body armored with jagged black plates, barreled toward him. Northern leapt into the air, his body arcing high above the beast. With both hands clenched together, he descended like a meteor, his combined fists slamming into the monster's back. The creature's armor shattered under the force, its body crumpling into the ground. The impact sent tremors rippling outward, toppling smaller monsters nearby. Northern stood atop the broken creature, his crimson aura flaring brighter. He stared down at the endless line of monsters with a predatory light burning in his eyes. Then he grinned. The monsters seemed to respond, their movements becoming more coordinated, their attacks more deliberate. Northern relished the challenge. One giant beast, towering over the rest, charged at him, its 4 legs pounding the ground with earth-shaking force. Northern didn't wait. He crouched, his muscles coiling like springs, and launched himself forward. The two collided mid-charge. Northern's shoulder drove into the beast's chest, shattering bone and flesh alike. The creature let out a choked roar, its massive body collapsing to the ground as Northern landed gracefully beside it. Another beast lunged from behind, its claws aimed for his back. Without turning, Northern spun on his heel, his fist swinging in a wide arc. The punch connected with the monster's side, folding its body in half before it was sent hurtling into the distance. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Northern moved like an unstoppable force, his strength rendering the monster's numbers meaningless. Each swing of his arm, each step he took, left destruction in his wake. At one point, 3 beasts rushed him simultaneously, their combined weight threatening to overwhelm him. Northern grabbed the closest one by the neck, using its body as a shield to block the others. With a roar, he swung the creature like a club, smashing it into the others and sending all 3 crashing to the ground. Black ichor coated the battlefield, the ground littered with the broken remains of monsters. Northern stood in the center of it all, his chest rising and falling steadily, his crimson aura still glowing faintly. But the horde wasn't finished. From the shadows of the jagged trees, more monsters emerged, their forms even larger and more grotesque than the ones before. Northern wiped a smear of ichor from his face, his grin widening. This battle is very sweet. Chapter 726. The Havoc Wrecker. The battlefield was a macabre cacophony, corpses of monsters littering the stream of dark blood in a twisted manner. And more were being added. The sound of fist connecting to flesh and wrecking bones tore through the winds and clouds like arms of thunder, each strike growing more ferocious than the last. Northern showed no mercy and drove through the line of monsters with a menacing grin on his face. He enjoyed how easy it was to kill them with his bare hands. Sometimes all he had to do was grab one by the head and tear it off its neck. Other times, he would just launch a devastating kick and a couple of monsters would fly into the air. He didn't even have to use any other ability of his talent except the tremendous strength it added to his body. That, alongside his already modified body, was flawless in almost every area. His movements were swift, combining sharp, short flight bursts with wicked blows. The line of morbid creatures had, in no time, been reduced to an eerie array of lifeless monsters, a gruesome scene that added a touch of eerie beauty to the nature of the Grey Realm. And yet, Northern continued to divide through their ranks, fast and powerful. Soon, very few of them were left, and those few began to fall back. In no time, they were running back to where they had come from. Northern summoned 5 clones and commanded them to start picking the cores before he went in pursuit of those monsters. Northern's body glided through the air like a crimson comet, his eyes locked onto the fleeing monsters below. Their movements were frantic, chaotic, as they scrambled to escape the unrelenting predator above them. The scene below was a stark contrast to the cold and calculated fury Northern embodied. He dove from the sky, his descent swift and precise. The force of his landing sent a shockwave rippling through the earth, throwing the closest monsters off balance. Before they could recover, Northern surged forward, his fists tearing through their ranks with brutal efficiency. A monster resembling a malformed gorilla with twisted large hands turned and roared, its massive arms swinging toward Northern. He ducked beneath the blow, his movements fluid and effortless. As the creature's momentum carried it past him, Northern planted his feet and drove his fist into its back. The sound of shattering bone echoed across the desolate landscape. The beast crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Another monster lunged at him from the side, its claws aiming for his throat. Northern caught its arm mid-swing, his grip like a vice. With a single motion, he swung the creature overhead and slammed it into the ground with enough force to crack the earth. "You should have stayed hidden," Northern said, his tone devoid of sympathy. The remaining monsters hesitated, their primal instincts clashing with the unnatural force compelling them to attack. Northern could see the fear in their glowing eyes, the flicker of doubt that came too late. He didn't wait for them to act. With a burst of speed, he closed the distance, his fists moving like sledgehammers. One by one, the monsters fell, their bodies joining the growing pile of carnage that littered the battlefield. The last of the creatures tried to retreat, but Northern launched himself forward, his flight swift and precise. His hand reached out, grabbing the final beast by its tail. It thrashed and howled, but his grip was unyielding. With a roar, Northern swung the creature in a wide arc, its body smashing into the ground and scattering debris in every direction. He released his hold, letting its limp form tumble across the wasteland before coming to a stop. Breathing steadily, Northern surveyed the battlefield. The monsters were gone, their corpses strewn across the Grey Realm in a grotesque tableau of destruction. He glanced back at his clones, who were diligently collecting the glowing cores from the fallen beasts. "This is good. Now let's go put an end to the bigger boys." Northern turned toward the direction the monsters were fleeing. He crouched deeply, reinforcing his body, for about 3 seconds. Then he muttered, "Titan's leap." Northern crouched, his muscles coiling like springs as energy surged through his legs. The ground beneath him groaned, cracks spreading outward in jagged lines as he prepared to unleash his strength. With an explosive burst, Northern launched himself into the sky, a crimson blur cutting through the gray horizon. The sheer force of his ascent left a massive crater in his wake, debris hurtling outward as if the earth itself had been torn apart. From his vantage point in the air, Northern's eyes locked onto what he initially thought was a vast, blackened hill rising ominously in the distance. Its surface appeared uneven, almost liquid in nature, as if the land itself was melting under the oppressive atmosphere of the Grey Realm. The closer he looked, the more unsettling the sight became. The hill shifted and writhed unnaturally, a ripple of movement running through it like a living tide. It wasn't a hill of stone or earth. It was a grotesque mass of monsters, their bodies piled and packed so tightly together that they merged into an undulating, blackened wave. At its base, the ground was slick with ichor, a viscous pool that reflected the dim, blood-red glow of the creature's eyes. The monsters layered over one another, claws and limbs intertwined, creating a grotesque, towering formation that seemed to pulse with life. Some of the creatures snarled and snapped at each other, fighting for position, while others remained eerily still, their hollow eyes locked on the horizon as if waiting for an unseen command. The creatures at the top were the largest, their massive forms looming like sentinels over the chaotic mound. Their twisted shapes were grotesque, a mix of sinew, bone, and jagged protrusions that glistened with dark ichor. Their glowing veins pulsed faintly, a synchronized rhythm that gave the entire hill an almost breathing quality. Northern's eyes narrowed as he hovered above the grotesque sight. The hill stretched far across the landscape, its base disappearing into the shadows of jagged, skeletal trees that bordered the desolate plain. It loomed over the battlefield, a testament to the sheer number of monsters that had converged here. What in the void? This wasn't just a gathering. The creatures had piled themselves together deliberately, as if they were a single entity, a collective force waiting to unleash its wrath. Chapter 7:27. The Hill. The stench of decay wafted upward, even reaching Northern at his altitude. It was a foul mixture of rot, blood, and something acrid, something ugly. The air around the hill shimmered faintly, as if warped by the sheer density of the energy emanating from the creatures. Northern focused on the hill. It was like a river of malevolence, each creature connected to the others in a grotesque web. Disgusting! His voice was cold and resolute. As he descended toward the writhing mass, the hill seemed to notice him. The creatures at the top turned their glowing eyes upward, snarling in unison. Slowly, the entire mound began to shift. Limbs untangled, massive forms rose, and the hill began to collapse as the monsters descended to face him. The liquid-like hill was alive, and it was coming for him. Good. Saves me the trouble of climbing. Northern descended rapidly, his crimson trail streaking through the ashen sky like a falling star. The writhing hill of monsters below began to unravel, its grotesque layers peeling apart as the creatures within surged forward in waves. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of snarls, guttural roars, and the sickening squelch of wet flesh shifting against itself. The first wave of monsters broke free, a swarm of smaller, four-legged creatures with hollow eyes and jagged teeth, their bodies glistening with dark ichor. They darted across the ground, their claws tearing through the cracked terrain as they leapt toward Northern. Northern landed with explosive force, activating Earthbreaker the moment his feet touched the ground. The impact sent a massive shockwave rippling outward, splitting the earth and hurling the smaller creatures into the air. Chunks of stone and debris rained down, mingling with the shredded remains of monsters caught in the initial blast. Northern surged forward, his fists blurs of motion. A creature lunged at him from the side, its maw wide open, but he intercepted it mid-air with a devastating uppercut. The force of the blow shattered its skull and sent its lifeless body careening into the horde behind it. Another beast, a larger one with jagged spines protruding from its back, charged at him head-on, its roar vibrating through the air. Northern caught its charge effortlessly, grabbing the creature by its spines. With a roar of his own, he lifted it overhead and slammed it into the ground with such force that the impact sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. More monsters poured from the collapsing hill, their massive forms crashing down in a relentless tide. A wicked light flickered in Northern's eyes, dividing in twain as he analyzed the monsters' movements and calculated their weaknesses. A towering beast, easily twice his size, lunged at him with clawed arms raised high. Northern crouched slightly, then launched himself upward, his fist driving into the creature's chest. The monster's ribcage caved inward as its body was lifted off the ground by the force of the punch. Northern followed through, grabbing the beast by the throat and slamming it into the ground with a sickening squelch. Black ichor sprayed across the battlefield, staining his boots. The horde pressed in, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm him. A dark grimace settled on his face as he surveyed the numbers of the monsters. Then he muttered, "Weight of the world." The air grew heavy as a crushing gravitational force radiated outward from him. The ground cracked and buckled beneath him, and the weaker monsters collapsed, their bodies flattened under the immense pressure. Those that managed to stay upright trembled, their movements sluggish as they struggled against the oppressive force. Northern moved like a blur, his punches and kicks tearing through the immobilized creatures. One swing of his arm obliterated a cluster of monsters, their bodies reduced to chunks of flesh and bone. A single kick sent another beast flying into the air, its body disappearing into the distance. The larger monsters roared in defiance, their glowing eyes blazing with fury as they fought against the gravity. One particularly massive creature, its body covered in thick, bone-like armor, managed to rise and charge at him. Northern met its charge head-on, driving a gruesome kick into its chest before it could get any closer. The impact was like a thunderclap, the creature's armored body crumpling under the sheer force. Northern grabbed the beast by its horns, twisted, and tore its head clean off, dark ichor spraying like a fountain. The battlefield was a scene of carnage. Corpses littered the ground, ichor pooling in massive craters left by Northern's relentless assault. But the hill wasn't done. The creatures still at its peak began to surge downward, their forms larger and more grotesque than the ones before. One beast, its body a writhing mass of tentacles and limbs, let out a piercing shriek as it charged toward him. Northern braced himself, his eyes narrowing. The tentacled beast lashed out, its limbs snapping toward him like whips. Northern sidestepped the attack, his movements swift and precise. He grabbed one of the tentacles mid-swing, his grip tightening until the appendage snapped. The creature shrieked in pain, but Northern didn't stop. He yanked the tentacle forward, dragging the beast closer. With a roar, he drove his fist into its face, the force of the blow shattering its skull and sending its lifeless body crashing to the ground. More monsters closed in, but Northern was a storm of destruction. He used colossal force to tear punches that created shockwaves through the horde. Each strike sent monsters flying, their bodies disintegrating under the sheer power of his blows. The final wave of creatures descended, their massive forms blocking out the sky. Northern smirked, crouching low as energy surged through his legs. "Titan's leap," he muttered. He launched himself into the air, his body hurtling toward the largest cluster of monsters like a missile. He slammed into the center of the group, activating Earthbreaker upon impact. Boom! The ground shattered, a massive crater forming beneath him as the shockwave obliterated everything in a wide radius. The remaining monsters were torn apart, their bodies reduced to nothing but blackened fragments. Northern straightened, his crimson aura fading as he surveyed the battlefield. The hill of monsters was gone, reduced to a sprawling graveyard of shattered corpses and dark ichor. He wiped a smear of blood from his cheek, his expression calm. In the distance, the monolithic structure loomed, its ominous energy pulsing faintly. Northern locked his gaze onto it, and leaped. Chapter 728, Magnifying Strength. The monolith loomed ahead, its black surface pulsating with a sinister light, which wasn't entirely dark, but instead carried a maroon hue like the monsters before, intermittently shimmering with the glow of a broken light. Northern landed before it, his boots sinking slightly into the cracked, ichor-stained ground. The silence that followed was heavy, a suffocating stillness that seemed to stretch endlessly. Within the towering structure, something stirred, something massive. The sinister light radiating from the monolith grew denser and began to oppress him, pressing against his skin like an unseen force. Northern stood before the towering monolith, his expression calm, yet disdainful. He took a step forward, his crimson aura erupting to life, casting an eerie glow across the desolate battlefield. The red light in his eyes flickered. He could feel the twisted energy swirling within the monolith, perfectly embodying an abomination. Northern clenched his fist, the crimson energy around him intensifying as he crouched slightly, muscles coiling like springs. The ground beneath his feet cracked and groaned, unable to withstand the sheer pressure radiating from him. With a deafening roar, he launched himself at the monolith, his fist glowing with the destructive power of colossal force. The impact was cataclysmic. Northern's punch struck the center of the monolith with such ferocity that the entire structure shuddered. Cracks spread outward like a spiderweb, glowing with faint lights of chaotic essence as the monolith began to fracture. The shockwave from the strike tore through the air, sending debris and shards of blackened stone hurtling in all directions. Northern didn't stop. He pulled his fist back and struck again and again, each blow more devastating than the last. The sound of shattering stone echoed across the gray realm, a symphony of destruction that drowned out the oppressive silence. With one final, earth-shaking punch, the monolith exploded. The structure crumbled into a million fragments, the chaotic essence within erupting like a geyser. A blinding light shot upward, tearing through the sky as the ground beneath the monolith collapsed into a massive crater. Northern stood amidst the wreckage, his aura blazing like a beacon in the darkness. From the ruins, the Rift Guardian emerged. It tore itself free from Northern's chaotic essence, its massive form unfolding with a horrifying grace. Its body was an abomination of flesh and bone, a writhing, shifting mass of grotesque shapes. Jagged spines jutted from its back, dripping with molten ichor, while its 6 blazing red eyes burned with malevolence. The ground trembled under its weight as its barbed tendrils lashed out, carving deep gouges into the earth. Massive, clawed hands flexed with terrifying power, each movement radiating an aura of destruction. The Guardian's maw opened, releasing a guttural roar that shook the very air, a sound that spoke of death and chaos. Northern tilted his head, a grin spreading across his face. He cracked his knuckles, the anticipation of battle igniting a fire in his eyes. The Rift Guardian struck first, its massive claw swiping through the air with enough force to create a vacuum. Northern leapt backward, narrowly avoiding the attack as the claw smashed into the ground, carving a deep trench in the earth. He launched himself forward, his body a blur as he activated Titan's Leap. Northern's fist connected with the creature's torso, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled across the air. Flesh and bone cracked under the force of the blow, but the Guardian barely flinched. The creature retaliated, its barbed tendrils whipping toward him with blinding speed. Northern twisted in mid-air, narrowly avoiding one, only to be struck by another. The barbs raked across his chest, tearing through fabric and skin. Northern gritted his teeth, blood dripping from the wound, and grabbed the tendril with both hands. With a roar, he yanked it forward, pulling the massive creature off balance. The Guardian's other arm swung toward him, but Northern used unyielding bulwark to harden his body like stone. The claw struck him square in the chest, the impact sending him skidding across the ground. Dust and debris filled the air, but Northern rose to his feet, his body unscathed. "That all you've got?" he taunted, blood staining his lips as his grin widened. The Rift Guardian roared in fury, its tendrils slamming into the ground, creating shockwaves that shattered the terrain. Northern slammed his fists into the ground in response. The resulting quake destabilized the creature, its massive body swaying as cracks spiderwebbed beneath it. Seizing the opportunity, he shot forward with a burst of speed, his fist glowing with the crimson light of colossal force. He drove his punch into the creature's knee, the force shattering the joint with a sickening crunch. The Guardian let out a deafening roar of pain, its massive body collapsing to one side. Northern didn't let up. He leapt onto its back, his fists raining down with devastating power. Each blow cracked bone and ruptured flesh, ichor spraying in all directions. The creature's tendrils lashed at him, but Northern tore them apart with his bare hands, using their own weight against them. He grabbed one tendril, swung it like a whip, and smashed it into the Guardian's face, breaking one of its glowing red eyes. The Guardian thrashed, its roars shaking the heavens, but Northern was relentless and stubborn. As he muttered, "Weight of the world," his oppressive aura bore down on the creature. The ground beneath them buckled, and the Guardian's movements slowed, its massive body trembling under the crushing force. With another roar, Northern leapt high into the air, his body glowing with crimson energy. Using Titan's leap, he began a meteoric descent. His fist struck the Guardian's skull, the force of the impact splitting it open. Bone and ichor exploded outward, painting the battlefield in gore. The creature convulsed, its massive body collapsing in on itself as the life drained from it. Northern stood atop the ruined corpse, his chest heaving. The Grey Realm was silent once more, the oppressive energy dissipating as the Rift Guardian's death echoed through the air. He wiped a smear of blood from his face, his crimson aura fading. That was a little bit difficult, he muttered, stepping off the corpse with an interesting light in his eyes. Behind him, his clones appeared, their arms laden with glowing cores. They moved efficiently, collecting the Guardian's massive core from its shattered body. Then the entire rift shuddered. Chapter 729. The unluckiest of them all. At the entrance of the rift, the three of them stood. The rift gate itself had long disappeared since they stepped through it. Assaulted by the cold, emotionless wind of the strange realm, they shivered intermittently, their eyes lingering on the horizon that sprawled far before them. If they wanted to, they couldn't even dare. Going forward was out of the question. With the intermittent ground-breaking tremors and sky-ripping sounds that tore their way to them, no, they didn't even consider it. Besides, Northern had instructed them not to. That instruction alone overwhelmed every other feeling and thought that they had. Aster stared into the distance. Compared to the other two cowering figures, he stood with a little bit of composed confidence, glaring at the ominous line of the horizon where the auspicious sounds rang from. Damn, I want to go. He clenched his fist. He was itching for it so badly, itching to see Northern in action, to witness with his own mortal eyes what might the strange and mysterious drifter embodied. But he also knew what was waiting for him should he disobey. So far, he could not tell what would even happen. A frown settled upon his face as he thought about it. Then he clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction and turned his face away from the horizon for once. Just as he did, the rift shuddered. The sky suddenly looked as if armies riding chariots of light had found their way to the corrupted sky, purging it from within. The landscape shook as if a mountain-sized abomination was about to tear out of the ground. But that was all about it. Then behind them, the portal that had disappeared began to shimmer back to life, sparking with threads of lightning. Eventually, a swirling mass like a whirlwind in a blue ocean emanated from the air and widened, once again recreating their way outside. Aster stared with widened eyes, his eyeballs shaking. What? He is done? No, he can't be done. It had not even been an hour. No, 30 minutes. Since Northern ventured deeper into the rift, and yet the rift gate had reappeared. The reappearance of the gate, of course, meant that the Rift Guardian had been defeated and the core had been destroyed. Northern had prevailed. And that too, alone. I have never heard of this in my entire life. A drifter. Not even in the times of legend and heroes, when strong drifters existed. No one had single-handedly cleared a rift. Not even a Tier I, not to talk of Tier V. Aster was horribly gripped by the shock of realization. His entire body trembled. His eyes just kept shaking. It was almost as if his body's reaction to the situation was too much. Or was there something else to it? The other two, slightly surprised but compared to Aster, they were like clueless children, only happy that their way out of the rift had come back. They would not be eaten by monsters. Without warning, Northern landed before the three of them, analyzing them with a cold stare in his eyes. Then he extended the bag in his hand forward to the two. Take. Those are the spoils. Aster frowned. You even picked the cores? How did you get enough time to do all of that? In about 25 minutes. Northern's gaze lingered on the chatterbox for a couple of seconds, bland and unreadable. Then he made a dumb expression and shrugged. It was that long? Damn. He walked into the rift and disappeared into the swirling whirlpool of essence. Aster looked at the two of them who were joyously holding the bag of cores. They stared at him too, blank, and shrugged before walking into the rift. Aster stayed for a few seconds, his sense of self forgotten, biting his fingers. The gate crackled, signaling its will to enter eternal slumber in the bosom of a certain person's soul. The crackle helped bring Aster to reality again. Then he stepped out of the rift. By the time he stepped out, the disaster had already begun. What? Not only did you come outside in just 27 minutes after entering the rift, you were also able to kill all the monsters, including the Guardian. How's that possible? The rift official in charge shouted with lost composure. The bag of cores was on the ground, opened. All the other officials could see it and were exchanging shocked glances with each other. The instructor, directly from the academy, was just arriving at the scene, walking forward with a tensed look as he could see the commotion in front. Reaching there, he asked, "What is going on here?" The rift official looked at him sternly as he explained, every word dripping with palpable respect. These students finished the rift in 27 minutes. They also managed to kill off the Rift Guardian and had enough time to pick all the cores. The instructor, his brown eyes settled calmly over the four of them. He shifted his gaze to the table and took Northern and his cohort's profile papers. As he read through, a small frown tugged at the edges of his brows. Students of the non-combative school? That's impossible, he muttered. The instructor raised his head and looked at Northern. How exactly did you achieve this? It's simple. I asked all three of them to pick the cores, while I alone focused on attacking the monsters. His response caused the frown on the instructor's face to deepen. He shifted his eyes to the paper in his hands, studying Northern's own in particular. Then his eyes widened as he saw some information that anyone would have missed. He's a sage? 16? This is inconceivable. With staggering eyes, he looked at Northern. How are you a sage at 16? Which nobility do you hail from? Northern shook his head, answering with an unimpressed and unbothered look in his eyes. I am from no noble family, grew up in the countryside, but I was one of the unlucky students that was forged by the hellish crucible of the Dark Continent. In fact, sir, I am the unluckiest of them all. Chapter 730. Interesting development. A heavy realization set in as Northern gave his reply to the instructor, reflecting as a sharp and suddenly guarded expression on the face of the man with straw-colored, loose hair. You are from the Dark Continent? His tone carried a little bit of disbelief. Northern nodded, asserting with his bland and stern reply, I am from the Dark Continent. How W? He stuttered and stopped himself mid-sentence. Wearing a thick look on his face, he stared at Northern and nodded. That makes a lot of sense then. He paused, catching his breath very briefly before he added, his eyes drifting over the rest of the cohort. Congratulations. You are the first cohort to clear the rift and more so, the first to come out. There will be a special reward waiting for you by the end of today. You can proceed to the warp portal and go to your hostelries to rest. Tonight there will be a carnival to celebrate Milwa's 300 years' death. Northern responded, Thank you, sir. He bowed his head slightly along with the rest of them, and they departed afterwards. Minutes later, back at the mansion with Northern back on his bed. He stared at the wound he had incurred during his fight with the Guardian. Thanks to his chaotic regeneration, his wound had closed up completely, although it left an ugly scar across his chest. But Northern was positive the scar would disappear much later. Changing his name had also removed him from the saving and defensive grace of the void force of limitless void. It was very sad, but it was also a gladdening thing. He was not insane or anything like that, but being wounded during battle due to his own carelessness was very enjoyable. All the time, void force was there to save his cocky ass, or his wrecked decisions. It was unfair, life was unfair, but he wanted to have things a little bit more raw. Or maybe he was being overly reckless because he had been sheltered by it for too long and had now misplaced the simple understanding of the importance of ultimate defense. But at the very least, he was not spewing something he wouldn't be able to back up by skill or show for it with his actions. If death came by such recklessness, he would accept it with open heart. Let's not think about death. I did not die before it became a thing. I have survived the kingdom of red mines with nothing in my arsenal. I'm sure I can do much better with this much. That said, Northern did not know any possible way of removing the field of force. The only thing he could do for now was manipulate it. Totally removing it was impossible. But at the very least, when he changed his name, his self-identity changed. The void force did not recognize him for that moment and returned to being an imperceptible and non-active force. Although, strangely enough, he could still access the limitless void itself. Because at the end of the day, that was still his soul. The limitless void itself was a sentient existence, an extension of his will. The void force was just a force field that came to be because of the limitless void. It was a simple conceptual law. Northern sighed. In the long run, though, he was sure the separation that name change brought would hinder some things. He needed the Titan's immense strength, but also his main course, void and chaos, were as important. Especially if the day comes that he has to face a tyrant, or an origin, which, if by the way is avoidable, he'd do his best to do so. But should push come to shove, he'd prefer to push the damn tyrant and shove its head up its ass. Hence, the reason for all this senseless amassing of talents. Right now, they were all over the place, but Northern did not want to face a tyrant and beg and wish he had copied more. Northern took a last glance at the grayed out, unwritten before switching to it. He felt no significant change disturb his body upon changing the name. He was the same as seconds before. But the runes of unwritten had come to life, while the Titan's reckoning had entered the gray areas. Northern stretched a bit. Then a small smile appeared on his face as he looked down on the panel of runes once again. Something very amazing had happened while he was in the room with a different identity. The single undisputed advantage of the name change ability. Northern now could trick all. And if he could trick all, he probably could trick every other damn existence that was tied to his rebirth. Yeah, he was talking about Nexus. With every monster that he had slain, the system's recounting of his achievement and talent fragments gains were non-existent. Northern suspected that he was absorbing soul essence before. But the more he fought, the more it became apparent. He was not absorbing soul fragments. When he changed his name back to Unwritten, what he saw made him definite of his suspicions during the battle. Talent fragments. 5,678/6,000. Before he entered the rift, he was at 1,000+ talent fragments, raked in by his summons, who are still fighting in the dungeon. He did not receive any announcement of talent fragments gain, but here they were. Which meant, it was not that the gains did not come in, just that the voice of the system had been silenced from his ears. Hopefully, that would mean that for that period of time, the voice of the system was also silenced in Nexus ears, or his activities were blinded from Nexus eyes. Although it was a vague suspicion. But it had to be one of the two. The most rewarding part, however, the part that made Northern sure that he was tricking all, was that 1, 2, 3, 4. Northern counted with his eyes, then beamed with a big smile when he was done counting. 7 items. 7. He had gained 7 whopping items from the rift. Now that was an interesting development. Chapter 731. Inspecting Items, Part 1. Northern carefully inspected the new runes that displayed along the list of his items. That particular portion of the panel had been stagnant for a while. He almost never bothered looking toward it because it saddened him to a degree. Today, right now, was the first time since leaving the kingdom of red mines that he had scrutinized the area with a joyous heart. He had received a handful of items from killing close to 1,000 monsters. Although 7 was a small amount, it was better than nothing, honestly. A far cry from what he used to be. Northern looked at the first item. It was a small rectangular glass bottle containing a black ominous liquid. Looking at it alone did not make him feel good. Item. Name. Neater's Dream. Type. Charm. Grade. Enchanted. Order. 2. Description. Neater once had a selfish dream to dominate all of her kinsmen and women. Then that wicked, frivolous person went on to liquefy the dream, and feed it to every damn one of them so they could be united in the dream. Hence, her strange ascension as the Spider Queen. Order ability. The dream, slow fade. It was a morbid and discomforting description. Whatever, that's Queen Spider's business. Northern flipped open the description panel of both order abilities. The first ability, in a way, summarized the entire description as its usage. It was a potion that could enchant someone into doing his bidding, but it had a time limit of 40 minutes after use. And the second ability was a passive one. Consistent use of the potion on the same target would cause a gradual but sure deterioration of their mental fortress. Northern didn't think he had much use for such an item presently. But there was no doubt it was an extremely useful item. For example, he could use it to place a temporary hex on Raven and have her say the truth. Was he really used? As if that will change anything. Northern thought with a dark grimace folding his face. He was obsessed with the event. And although he was angry and pissed to death with both of them, he still wanted to know if truly both of them had no idea all that was going to happen and approached him because they wanted to help each other. But when he looked at the fact that someone like Terence existed and her reaction when he was about to make that annoying sacrifice on the ship. Hell, in no way she didn't know. Terence definitely had to have known something. And if she knew something, that meant Raven also knew something. Which came back to mean he was utterly deceived and used. Now, this pained and hurt him so much because this was the life he lived throughout his stay on Earth. He was confident that he had grown, had learned from it, and would never allow himself to be used again because of his naivete. And then Terence and Raven happened to him, proving to him that he was only a child after all. In a way, the real person Northern was angry with was himself. But he was not going to beat himself up now, was he? But as far as they lived, they would continue to carry the burden of his hatred. That was their own way of being punished for using him. Why am I seriously even thinking about them? They can go to hell for all I care. Northern, with a serious frown on his face, shoved all ravening and terencing thoughts out of his head and focused on the next item on his list. It was a crystal with very sharp corners, so sharp that they could easily cut his skin if it was any less tender than it was right now, or if he had not evolved several nights before. The crystal had a sharp crimson radiance that seemed to reflect endlessly within, almost as if it encased a reflecting world of red glow. Then somewhere in that world was a single ember of flame that seemed more sculptured than alive. Regardless, the item was a breathtaking beauty. Name: Lost Ember. Type: Charm. Grade: Arcane. Order: 1. Description: the lost ember was not actually lost. Some crazy dude obsessed with the art and act of fire encased it in the safe space of a crimson crystal shard. Order ability: Heart of Fire. Northern dwelled shortly on the description. It was quite interesting and vague at the same time. Every item had a story behind them. Most times that was what the descriptions were. A pointer to the origin of the weapon and a sort of half-assed, coded manual to its uses. And the order ability: Heart of Fire. When you attach the lost ember to an armor or shield type item, the item gains a heart of fire. A heart that burns when struck, furious and fierce, passionate and relentless. Northern scratched his temple, looking a little lost. How do I attach this to an armor? He had not heard or seen any armor that items could be added to. But then again, items were the one thing he had not heard or seen many things about. Northern moved on to the next. Name: Moonlit Scale. Type: Charm. Grade: Lordly. Order: 4. Description: the moon once fell, shards of its skin peeled off due to the cataclysmic event. The shards have sedimented to become fragments that carry the moon's essence. Order ability: Moonlit, Dreamwalker, Deep Sleep, Lucid Dream. Moon fell? That's so insane and superstitious. How can the moon fall? I have read a number of books on history, and yet I have never come across a record of an event like that. If the moon really did fall, then it would have been noted in almost every book of history, because such an event would have marked the progressive civilization of the world. Except if it wasn't this world, or it wasn't talking about an actual moon. Descriptions of items were another case entirely. People went to school, studied for years just to be able to decode the description of items. The study of item description was called lexemancy. Practitioners of lexemancy would delve into the layered descriptions of items, analyzing the historical, cultural, and soul-binding contexts embedded within the text. The discipline held immense value. Lexemancers often worked as scholars, advisors, or even strategists, helping their clients unlock the true potential of their items. So, item description was a serious headache. It was something people went to school and specialized in. The academy even offered the course also. It was a vital part of the world's functional knowledge, akin to alchemy or engineering. He was not going to concern himself or break his head if he couldn't figure some of them out. What mattered was the potential with which he could use them. The abilities of the item spread out before his eyes. Moonlit. In the darkness, this scale automatically sheds moonlight around a 15-foot radius of you. When you sleep with this scale in your hands, you are able to enter different states of sleep. Dreamwalker. You can enter the dream of a sleeping creature. Deep sleep. You can enter a long rest. Northern waited, confused. So basically, this can help me sleep? It was a little bit disappointing, but he tried not to look at it the wrong way. Maybe, if I am in a situation where it's difficult to sleep, it'll come in handy. But the way his sleeping habits had been these days, he suspected less likeliness of that happening. Northern averted his gaze and read through the last ability. Luckily, that one turned out to be more useful than the rest. Lucid dream. You can dream of your surroundings. When you do so, you see and hear as if you are awake and can't be surprised. Chapter 732. Inspecting Items, Part 2. Oh wow! Northern was silent for a moment, blinking as he read through the runes of the last order ability. Simply to say, I can be asleep and not be asleep. For someone usually as guarded as he was, this was a very interesting ability. And the value of this item just scaled higher before his eyes. Northern smiled. He still had to go through 4 other items, and truth was, he was feeling pretty sleepy already. Not that he planned to sleep yet. Item. Name. Fong of the Woodkeeper. Type. Weapon. Grade. Lordly. Order. 2. Description. The only remains of the Woodkeeper of the Old Coppice in the Eastern Seas. Order ability. Hell's Guard. Command of the Keeper. Hell's Guard. This dagger deals extra, killing damage to undead and humanoid-type monsters. Command of the Keeper. When this order is activated, your voice turns unnaturally ominous as you speak. Your eyes completely turn black for a few seconds, and light in a 10 m radius around you is darkened for a few seconds. Northern flexed the dagger in his hands, swinging it in short distance. It was a small and compact dagger, with a sinisterly curved and jagged blade resembling a fong dripping with malice. I'm sure it will come in handy. Northern dismissed it and focused on the next item at hand. Item. Name. Staff of Utility. Type. Utility. Grade. Arcane. Order. 5. Description. The memory of Asher the traveler slumbers in the fibers of this wood. Order ability. Flute. Fishing hook. Pickaxe. Shovel. Ignoring the description, Northern studied the order abilities, and it turned out that the Staff of Utility was a very useful object, one he wouldn't trade for anything. The staff had the ability to be used as a flute, a fishing hook, a pickaxe, and a shovel. And the last? Insinuated that when certain conditions were met, he could add one more utility made of wood by feeding it to the staff. Although Northern was not sure why he would ever need to play a flute. All others, he was sure would come in handy as the future progressed. Item. Name. Lightning chains. Type. Weapon. Grade. Lordly. Order. 2. Description. Forged by the hands of a man who has wrestled with lightning and injured thunder. Order ability. Lightning strike. Electrified shackle. The world was so broad. Maybe not Ultrael alone. The universe. Whatever universe existed in this plane was so broad. The diverse and endless stories in the descriptions of each weapon was proof of it. Imagine how many weapons drifters get day in day out, and maybe only 5 in 1,000 link with each other. Each description tells the origination of each item. A story is there, a story is always there. The presence of that story tells of a history that not so many are well versed with. Thinking about this made Northern realize, perhaps the history of Ultrael was just one of many that truly existed. Shaking his head bitterly at how a world can be so complicated, Northern summoned the weapon while reading through its order abilities. The chain shimmered with a faded blue radiance, glowing with faint sparks, as it wove itself around Northern's right hand, all the way to his arm. After the summoning process was over, the chain's light dimmed, revealing its true nature. A dull black chain that wrapped itself around his arm. At an ordinary glance it looked pretty ordinary, in fact old. But taking a deeper look, the shackles were like an insidious serpent subtly shifting, and yet blending with the darkness in the corner of the room. It looked dangerous and ominous, enough to make something crawl on anyone's back. Northern took a long look at it and liked what he saw. He smiled. Fortunately, the abilities of the chain were as good as the chain itself looked. The first one allowed him to strike lightning with his fist while the chain was in its dormant state, wrapped around his arm. The second ability, when he was actively using the chain, let him channel lightning through it, causing a chain attack to every creature within a 20 m radius of the first target. The idea of using chains soothed him so much. He had been practicing fighting with threads recently, although not very often, but he was gradually thinking of another style of fighting. The sword remained his best and most suitable style of fighting, but because of his formless, now omniform, Northern did not want to stay with just one style. And now that omniform granted him the liberty to become anything, he was sure absorbing several other combat styles and weapons wouldn't be a bad idea. This chain just happened to come at such a moment. There couldn't have been a better time. Northern curled a corner of his lips, gleaming at the chains wrapped around his slightly raised arm. "You're welcome, buddy. I will put you to good use. And the last one. I'm already on the last one?" Northern looked a bit somber as he opened the runes of the last item. However, his downcast eyes slowly widened, flames of life lighting them up. His mouth opened. "Ooh-hoo? What is this? Damn. What the hell is this luck? Item. Name. Lightning and Thunder. Type. Utility. Grade. Heroic. Order. 3. Description. Forged and used by the hands of a man who has wrestled with lightning and injured thunder. Order ability. Forging beam. Lightning craft. Thundercraft. Reforge. Forging beam. When activated, vicious flames emanate from you, with every hit of the forge hammer against metal, affecting everything within 60 m radius of you. Lightning craft. Using the lightning attribute of the hammer, you can hasten the forging process, making it 10 times faster. But your essence will tell for it. Thundercraft. Every item crafted by this hammer gains the thunder attribute of this hammer, making them more durable than many. Reforge. When you destroy a mundane item with this hammer, you can forge it back with the hammer, adding order to it. Northern froze, blinking at the last set of runes. His hand rose to his open mouth, trying to cover it for a moment. Damn it! Chapter 733. Changes are coming. After witnessing the last item, Northern could almost not sleep. He was troubled and toiling with so much joy. At last it was at hand. The goal he thought would be far in the future was delivered right before his hands. In no time he would be able to make mundane items have orders just like soul items. Although there was no certainty that they would be soul-bound too, this was a first step. A great one at that. One that arrived too early. Northern had wanted to do it, but this was something he was still looking at in the next 2 or 3 years, after he had gotten quite used to soul forging of the limitless void. But now things had turned around for him. First, I'm going to get used to soul forging as fast as I can. That means I need to start a forge construction in the limitless void. Not just a forge construction. Northern had once taken a short survey around his soulscape and noted some things that he could build. This was, after all, not something he was unused to. He was an able engineer in his past life. Even though he had not practiced for a long while, that knowledge still resided in him. When he took that survey and planned the way the buildings in the limitless void would be, he was very happy. He felt like himself for some reason. Lost in that zone where the cares of the world and the deceitfulness and riches of power mattered not to him. Like a child that just earnestly wanted to play. He planned to make the limitless void become a city of his own. Outside the limitless void, the souls that resided there lacked bodies and were no less than ghosts. But inside, they were as real as night terror and every other void summon was. Not to mention, with time, they had begun to show growth, attitudes besides what you'd expect a monster to be. Creating more infrastructure in the void would definitely grant them the privilege to learn much better and become more intellectual. Then, at the center of this civilization in his soul would be the forge. The core of everything. The place where every mineral would be processed and used for a greater good. The place where soul-bound items would be created en masse and spread across the whole world. Distributing his influence and amassing riches for himself. Northern rolled on the bed, turning his face up and his arms folded behind his head. He studied the intricate design of the ceiling as he thought about it. Loud drums and joyous jubilation from the city, along with some students perhaps, flowed into his ear, somewhat subdued by the stretched-out distance between the estate and the main city. Milwa hailed from the kingdom of Verulania. He had accomplished several things in the name of the nation, and was one of the reasons why Verulania mattered in the pages of history and the significance of nations in the world today. It was no wonder the nation had taken it upon themselves to always have this carnival, with or without the approval of the Academy. It was just an extra joyous occasion that the Academy, a center of Milwa's accomplishment, joined them in this season. Snowflakes danced tenderly in the cold wind, settling on the edges of windows and roof, slowly gathering a pile of white on them. The wind was biting outside. People wore thick fabrics and carried sticks of flames and paper lanterns with burning plumes of flame. They danced to a strange trumpeting sound, along with loud, heart-thumping drums. Northern could feel the subtle vibration of the ground, his bed, following each beat of the drum. It would be hell of noise down there. Astor had knocked on his room several minutes before he lay down, inviting him to go to the carnival together. But Northern refused. He and the other three could just receive the reward on his behalf. He was not going to go somewhere that noisy. Aside from his cohort, no cohort had made it out of the rift. Usually, a Tier V rift was not something a bunch of awakened drifters, nomads, or at most masters could defeat on their own. What the school expected was the most they could do within the time frame they were given. Defeating the rift in 30 minutes was an outrageous and blatantly unbelievable achievement. It was bound to cause some noise very soon. It would take at least 2 days for anyone to come out with above 50 kills, except for those that gave up midway. Northern thought for a while and muttered, "I feel like I know who will come out first." He dwelled on the thought for a while, went on to think about a few other strong folks he had noticed during the assembly. With the soul-reading ability of his eyes, he saw several interesting students with amazing talents and soul attributes, but none interested him more than the instructors. The 4 instructors that were the school's strongest. While imagining what tactics he would employ fighting each of them and how interesting the fights would be, he drifted towards the steep plane of slumber. It was so steep that he couldn't pull himself up. Not that he wanted to anyway. Before long into the night, Northern was sound asleep, surrounded by the muffled sound of the carnival. In a large and deep brown accented room, sitting around a long rectangular table were 5 instructors. 1 at the head of the table, 2 on the left, and the other 2 on the right. All 5 of them stared at the paper reports on their table with disbelieving expressions. The instructor seated toward the last end of the right broke the silence, a slight frown hardening his gaze. "This doesn't make sense. Even as a sage, defeating a Tier V rift alone in 30 minutes? That's unheard of." Instructor Wayne's voice rose slightly, his frustration spilling over. "Facts are facts, Wayne," replied Instructor Bradley, sitting to Wayne's left. His tone was calm but laced with pointed frustration. "The rift is gone. Denying the evidence won't help us prepare for what's coming." Instructor Wayne grimaced, slamming the report on the table. "Prepare? For what?" Another prodigy who thinks the academy is beneath them? You saw what happened the last time someone this strong thought they didn't need us and ended up tarnishing our name. These are two different scenarios. Ruffsberg is different from an ordinary student. Besides, this only calls for a different approach. Bradley countered, his voice firm. This boy isn't just another talented student. He's an anomaly. If we fail to act now, we risk him becoming either a loose cannon or someone else's weapon. The head instructor, seated at the table's center, raised his hand, silencing both men with an authoritative gesture. Enough, he said, his voice steady and commanding. This isn't about past failures or bruised egos. This student represents a turning point for this academy. Whether we like it or not, he's outgrown the typical student mold. Either we guide him to our cause, or we risk him becoming a threat. The room fell silent for a moment, each instructor absorbing the weight of the head instructor's words. Bradley leaned forward, tapping the edge of his report thoughtfully. We need to establish a foundation of trust. Start with his family. If we offer them opportunities, social elevation, resources, we can tie Northern's future to the academy's success. Wayne scoffed, crossing his arms. And if he refuses? What then? Do we just let him walk around, stronger than any of us, and hope he doesn't hold a grudge? Especially after what happened with the Dark Continent. Your skepticism is noted, Wayne, the head instructor replied coolly. But for now, we extend the hand of cooperation. We can't afford to alienate him, and we certainly can't afford to antagonize him. The priority is ensuring Northern feels valued, respected, and connected to the academy. Assuming that works, Wayne muttered under his breath, though his tone had softened slightly. The head instructor turned his attention to another man seated across from Bradley. This instructor had a stony face marked with a deep scar that ran across his cheek. His sharp eyes studied the head instructor carefully. Darville, you and Wayne will make the arrangements, the head instructor continued. Find his family. Present them with our offer, subtle, non-intrusive, but enticing enough to draw their loyalty. Report back once it's done. Darville nodded curtly. Understood, sir. Wayne sighed, his posture relaxing slightly as he gave a reluctant nod. Noted. The head instructor leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together. His gaze swept across the room, resting momentarily on each instructor. This situation demands caution, he said. His potential is undeniable, but power without direction is chaos. If we don't guide him, someone else will. And that someone may not have our best interests at heart. He paused for a moment, then added, a monster has been birthed among us. But whether that monster serves as a shield or a sword depends entirely on us. The weight of his words settled over the room. None of the instructors spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, the head instructor waved his hand dismissively. That will be all for now. Prepare your plans and move quickly. This is an opportunity we can't afford to lose. The instructors rose one by one, their expressions somber and focused. Even Wayne, though still visibly skeptical, left the room with a more subdued demeanor. Chapter 734. Rising Misunderstanding. The second day, Northern did not have much to do. In the morning, he made his way to the estate cafeteria, expecting to hear a thing or two, but the place was dry. Not every one of the little 200 students that did not participate in the festival contest came to the cafeteria. Why would they anyway? Each mansion was equipped with a stately kitchen and dining area to serve them. The cafeteria was just an extension made available for the students to be able to dine together regardless of what mansion they stayed in. Northern's purpose of going to the place was to gather information, which proved a little bit useless. He got a thing or two sure, but he had a chatterbox. They were nothing he couldn't have gotten his hands on. Still, he looked to the bright side of it. It was a good walk. He then retreated into the infinite void. He picked up Linus' two companions and the missing academy teacher, who, contrary to what he thought, no one seemed to care about. Or the news of his disappearance had not just gotten to Northern's ears. Northern explained the basics of a simple survey and land marking for them. He hadn't done much around architecture and civil engineering, but while in school, he had touched a bit of it from borrowed courses before entering his major. Besides, he did not need to do so much. It was the limitless void, his soulscape. He just needed this bare minimum to have a grasp over what he wanted to do with the land area. Together with the three humans, Northern ventured into the uneven and mountainous terrain of the Red Mine. The Red Mine and its kingdom was the closest land area to the Void Palace, which sat atop a mighty hill that effortlessly rose above every other mountain. The outer appearance of the hall was darkly grand, like the tower of the devil himself. Northern was no devil, at least not yet, which was why he planned to add a little touch of beauty much later. Give whoever managed to wander in a mixed feeling as to whether this belonged to a devil or an angel. I just want to confuse the hell out of them. He grinned. Watching him grin from the corner, Aland felt cold dread prickle his skin from inside his blood. If only he had refused the job at the academy, if only he had decided to push a bit harder as a drifter, if only he had gone for that bank clerk job his friend offered him. But to what end would all these regrets benefit him? He was stuck in a realm of crimson darkness, sometimes of cold and wicked snowstorms, other times the climate of the region itself seemed unsure of what to be. He had no idea where this place was, and he knew he was stuck there for life. After being spared last minute from Northern's sword, he disappeared only to find himself in a mine of red crystal. He saw two other humans like him, who were nice and explained their situation. What he understood from the story they told him was that unless he grew stronger enough to be noted or looked upon by the King of Void, he would never see the light of day. Linus had the same fate as them, but he did not let it bear him down. He worked harder and eventually, his might was recognized by the king. Hence, he was granted a chance of service up close. Now, he was fighting for the king and killing monsters. The void was refreshing, most times cruel. Feeling the tender blow of fresh and cool wind would be a great boon to their morale and mental fortress. But if they were to have something of such semblance, they'd need to be strong enough to serve the Void King up close. This was what all the creatures within the void strived for, and every single one of them worked painstakingly towards it. Mining minerals, every day. Aland at first couldn't help but think it to be stupidness. Initially, he thought, how can mining some red crystals help anyone become stronger? Then he witnessed the wicked bloodlust of the crystals. Then he witnessed the fiery defense of the volcano stones, the freezing intensity of the frozen shards. All those minerals, each hit of his axe against the mineral was a lesson of resilience and growth he had never thought he'd learn. At least not in such a place. When he got dismissed, he thought he was going to suffer for the rest of his life. But when he conversed with the humans, received the hospitality of the monsters, and saw how the hard work was actually a disguise of training that many were not opportune to receive, he couldn't help but see Northern in a different light. He's giving me another chance? A massive bull-headed monster had placed its hand upon him and nodded in that moment. The boy he, even though unknowingly, sent to the Dark Continent was giving him another chance. A chance to grow, to be better than himself and make better choices. All that battle with him, Aland suddenly received a full revelation of it. The Void King could have ended his life in a minute, but yet, he chose to take a different approach to it, so that Aland could learn from his weakness and when he got to this place, take it upon himself to become strong. Aland rose in admiration for the King of Void when that realization settled in his gut of understanding. He respected and adored him, really, but staring at him like this close to him, he felt a mix of admiration and fear. But most especially, he felt gratitude towards the king. Northern turned around, feeling an uncomfortable gaze lingering on him. What? He glared at Aland. Nothing, sir. Northern raised a brow, confused at what he just heard. But he was too preoccupied with the things he wanted to do to care. Chapter 735. Land Area of the Limitless Void. Northern already had the details he needed. He had, after all, surveyed the place before. He had a rough idea of how he wanted the whole place to be. The Void Palace marked the beginning of the Limitless Void. Well, in a way. Northern considered it more of a center than an actual beginning. The limitless void for now had no beginning and also no end. But the landmark that it started with, however, was the Void Palace. The palace stood perched atop the tallest mountain in the scape, its jagged and uneven silhouette resembling the visor of a gigantic demonic knight. Eerie azure lights spilled from its slick, horizon-cut windows, casting ghostly beams that illuminated the dark mountain beneath. At the base of this mountain was a foreboding coppice. The blackened, twisted trees appeared as though they'd been torched by an inferno of black flames, their charred remains frozen mid-scream. This haunting grove acted as a grim prelude to the first mountain of the Red Mine. The Red Mine consisted majorly of 3 large mountains. Although they were not as tall as that which held the palace, the mountains of the Red Mine boasted more robustness, with a single mountain spreading over 3,000 kilometers. The soil and rock gleamed a deep crimson, making the terrain look as though it bled endlessly from unseen wounds. At the edge of the third mountain, the stark vividness of the Red Mine gave way to something different. A vast lake of still, dark water, shimmering faintly under the omnipresent dim light of the limitless void. This lake rested in the shallow valley formed between the Red Mine and the imposing Glacier Mountain. But before the waters could lull one into tranquility, there lay the ominous carcass of a massive creature. The beast's bones jutted out from the ground like the ribs of a fallen colossus, their white marred with streaks of black decay. Time and the weight of the earth were already claiming it, as some parts of the skeleton had begun to sink into the cracked, blood-red soil. Beyond this grim sight, the icy majesty of Glacier Mountain loomed. The mountain rose tall and imposing, its peaks encrusted with blue-white ice that shimmered with an almost unnatural brilliance. Glacial sheets draped over its flanks, flowing down in slow, frozen cascades. Unlike the bloodied tones of the Red Mine, Glacier Mountain was a realm of cold purity, its chill seemingly seeping into the surrounding air. Past the icy expanse of frozen mountain, the landscape transformed again. Here, the fiery wrath of nature revealed itself. A volcanic mountain stood in stark contrast to the frozen beauty that preceded it. Rivers of molten lava coursed down its rugged slopes, cutting glowing paths through the darkened rock. The air here was thick with ash and sulfur, the ground trembling faintly under the mountain's restless heart. And after the volcanic mountain, the world unraveled into desolation. A vast, dark plain stretched endlessly under oppressive gray skies. The land was barren and jagged, its surface cracked and dotted with black hilltops that rose like scars from the earth. Twisted black trees, stripped bare of leaves, clawed at the sky, their forms unervingly human in their skeletal appearance. This was all there was to the limitless void. For now, Northern had already walked the length and breadth of this place at his leisure times except the newest terrain which just came around yesterday. Also, thanks to Mind's Eye, he could easily gloss over everything with a satellite-like vantage point. As for where he wanted to start his building, the point that would mark the heart of his forge, Northern was still walking with the 3 humans. They were gasping for their breath, panting and sweating like they were walking through the bridges of ruthless inferno. The poor part was, they had not even gotten to the volcanic terrain yet. Northern glanced at them and shook his head in disappointment. How could they be so weak? After a few moments, it did not matter that they were feeling so hot and tired. Perhaps the 3 of them had been deluded to think that the chilling wind of the frozen mountain would be a friend to them because the Red Mine was a temperate region. But they were wrong. The cold assaulted them with biting intensity. They hugged themselves and shivered nonetheless, their upper and lower teeth smacking against each other uncontrollably. The perspiration on their faces instantly froze and their hands were whitening. They looked in front of them. Northern wore a thin white fabric that was dancing happily in the wind. He did not look at all like he was treading the path of such an unfair cold. After a while, they arrived at the volcanic region. As they crossed into the volcanic region, the air transformed abruptly. The frigid winds of Glacier Mountain disappeared, replaced by an oppressive heat that bore down on them like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The ground beneath their feet became hot to the touch, forcing the 3 humans to hop uncomfortably in an attempt to keep from burning their soles. Rivers of molten lava snaked through the cracked, darkened earth, glowing with a fierce orange-red hue that cast flickering light onto their sweat-slicked faces. Geysers of steam hissed from the ground without warning, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of sulfur, burning their throats with every shallow breath. The three humans, tired, shivering, and now sweltering, groaned in protest. They wanted to speak, ask the Void King how exactly he was resisting the harsh temperature of the limitless void. But none of them dared. Aside from the fact that they couldn't even conceive of just calling and talking to Northern casually like nothing was wrong. Their hearts quaked heavily with intense fear for the boy that walked before them. They stumbled forward, trying to keep pace. The volcanic mountain loomed ahead, its peak hidden by thick clouds of ash and smoke. Rivers of molten rock glowed faintly in the distance, creating an eerie, shifting pattern of light and shadow across the desolate terrain. Finally, Northern stopped at a small plateau overlooking a wide, flat expanse surrounded by jagged rock formations. Here, the heat was less oppressive, though the ground still radiated warmth. The three humans collapsed onto the ashen earth, gasping for air. "This is the place," Northern announced, his voice cutting through their exhaustion like a blade. The three looked up at him in confusion. "What place?" He gestured around them, his eyes scanning the terrain with a calculating precision. "The forge will begin here." They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if they had misheard him. Aland, with a sweat-drenched face and trembling hands, finally spoke with caution. "Here? In the middle of this furnace?" Chapter 736. The Forge's Blueprint. It was not just unfathomable, it was an abominable idea. An idea that could only have been birthed from a wicked and inconsiderate mind. Inconsiderate for oneself and for others. That was the way Aland and the other two humans stared at Northern. Their eyes held a mixture of confusion and frustration. Why would any sane human create a forge at the side of a volcano? Definitely, Northern had chosen a point with less heat and effect from the volcano. But it didn't make it any less disturbing that he was creating the center of whatever settlement he intended to build in the volcano. He had briefed them of his plan and why he was taking them with him, so the three of them slightly understood. Northern had even said, when this project started, the three of them would be the ones in charge. Not because he considered them any bit important, he just needed scapegoats to use in case of failures. However, the three humans might have thought otherwise of Northern's unexplained action. Albeit positively, Northern looked over the gray plains that sprawled beyond the mountain. "The forge is going to be as large as the mountains. Then over there will be a settlement of some sort." He turned his head to the Glacier Mountain. "There will be another settlement over there all the way to the Red Plains. Then I will find a way to create an agricultural system around that sentient water." He had not confirmed about the icy mountain and the gray plains, but he knew for sure that the red mine could cultivate some plants. It would just be a little bit tougher than usual. Besides, agriculture did not follow the same spectrum on Trael as it did on Earth. On Earth, for example, there were three main categories of soil types. Trael had an astonishing 8. All 8, however, had plants that were best suited for them. Resin was a type of soil that was mainly used to propagate tree-type plants and mostly extensive life-cycled plants. If one was to cultivate an annual plant with resin soil, they'd see no result. The crop could take 6 months to barely bring forth a little sprout. Whereas with Leysin it could start bearing fruits in 6 months. The soil of the red mine was resin, although with a little infected attribute of the blood-soaked nature of the mountain's mineral. There were bound to be consequences with using such a soil even to grow trees. But it was not impossible. Northern was just putting all these things for now into thought process. The humans so far had been feeding on carcasses of monsters. There was a reason as to why the Kirathon's body was left with only bones. Northern wanted the forge to be as big as the volcano itself. He wanted the entire region to be dedicated to the flaming crucible of item creation. The volcano itself was going to be his furnace. And to ensure that the foundation edifice would be sturdy enough to remain despite the heat and power of the volcano, he would be using the volcano's own mineral for the constructions, the volcano stones, which the refined version he named Volthium. Wolfram was a material that could resist incredibly high temperatures. It was the best form of defensive material one could use to create a weapon. Although the mining process was difficult as its resistance was intense just like the red crystals, it was not impossible. In fact, some monsters were already mining it, although in low quality. Another difficult mineral to mine was the ice crystals, but for some reason Mr. Fluffy found it very easy to mine. The beast often transformed to his bipedal form to mine also and raked in quite a lot of ice crystals that Northern was grateful he majorly resided in the icy mountain. Although right now, he was in the dungeon tearing flesh after flesh with his crude fangs. Northern scratched his hair behind, trying to reach for his scalp but to no avail. I wonder if they are doing well. Of course they were. The flooding amount of talent fragments he kept receiving by the minute was proof of it. Although they didn't seem to have gotten to the next floor boss yet. Northern's gaze was as sharp as the wind that tore through the volcanic ridges. The thought of building something magnificent, a true soulscape forged from ingenuity and chaos, burned in his mind. To the untrained eye it was madness. To Northern it was art. We'll start by clearing the rim here. His voice carried a strange conviction that silenced the murmurs behind him. The volcanic flow will serve as the heart of the forge. All of it must be redirected through channels we'll carve into the stone. Intense heat flowing directly into our smelting chambers. One of Linus' two subordinates, Roan, shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck as he stared at the jagged terrain. You're asking us to move molten rock. Isn't that madness? Northern didn't glance back. Madness is relative. When this is done, it won't just be a forge. It will be the lifeblood of this city. And you three, if you don't die in the process, will be legends. It was impossible to tell if that last statement was a grim jest or a genuine promise. The Glacier Mountain loomed to the north, its icebound cliffs reflecting faint light across the barren plains. Northern's plan for a settlement there would be equally ambitious. The contrast of fire and ice, of metal and water, spoke to something primal in him. Two forces in constant tension, yet necessary to shape something extraordinary. He exhaled, his thoughts drifting back to Wolfram. All of this would come to fruition as soon as possible if the rate of the Wolfram mining could pick up drastically. Wolfram wasn't just heat-resistant. It was practically impervious to entropy itself. Once refined, it could endure the ravages of both time and chaos. It was fitting, really, that his new world would be built atop such a volatile foundation. But refining Wolfram wasn't simple. The monsters mining the volcanic stone had only scratched the surface of its potential. Northern would need to devise a new process to extract its essence while retaining its unparalleled strength. And then there was the matter of Mr. Fluffy. The beast was his strange and best ally, feral yet loyal in its own unpredictable way. Its ability to harvest ice crystals effortlessly had given Northern an unexpected advantage. The icy mountain's wealth was immense, and with Mr. Fluffy's contribution, Northern could see a future where the icy peaks and volcanic forge were inextricably linked, heat and cold, creation and preservation. Still, he couldn't linger on the logistics forever. The humans following him weren't equipped for this kind of ambition. Not yet. Northern glanced back at the three of them, his expression unreadable. We'll need to move fast. The forge comes first. If you waste time questioning my methods, you'll be the first ones buried under molten rock. Alan's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. The other two exchanged uneasy glances but kept quiet. Northern turned back to the vast expanse, his mind already racing ahead to the next step. He wasn't just building a city. The vision of this soulscape in his mind was shaping an empire, a testament to everything he had learned, every fragment of talent he had stolen, and every ounce of resolve he carried. The first step was the foundation. The volcanic rim would be chiseled and carved to support the colossal structure he envisioned. From there, channels for the lava flow would be reinforced with Wolfram, ensuring an endless supply of heat for smelting and forging. Next would come the settlement itself. Northern had no intention of creating a simple village. It would be a hub of innovation, a place where talent and strength converged. The icy peaks to the north would serve as a reservoir of resources, their frozen bounty complementing the volcanic forge. And in the center of it all, the forge would rise like a monument, a testament to the power of will and ingenuity. But there was something else lingering in the back of Northern's mind. The forge wouldn't just be a place of creation. It would be a weapon. The thought was a quiet one, buried beneath layers of other plans, but it was there nonetheless. Aside from the rifts that plagued Ultra-L, should the inevitable disaster he always thought about and subtly feared arrive, he would need weapons crafted not just from metal, but from the very essence of the limitless void itself. And the forge would give him that power. Soulforge. Chapter 737. The Key Jars. Northern spent quite a while in his soulscape. Even after he was done mapping out, he wanted to get a total number of souls that resided there, which shockingly were a lot. Northern, since he gained the soul world ability of the void, had killed over 10,000 monsters. It was really shocking to him. And these were monsters that had died by his sword alone. The ones that died by the hands of his void summons were not included. They consumed the soul of whatever they killed and rendered its core to him as talent fragments. So, the monsters in the limitless void could only be put there by him alone. Which made the realization that he had killed by his own hands over 10,000 monsters appalling. The souls that were ushered in by Soul Taker's demise were not accounted for in that 10,000. And the total souls that were liberated were about 1,000, with 100 of them being Tomb Kings. Northern was not also sure what that was yet, but he suspected that they were the kings and legends of the old era, the dispensation of time that was not recorded in history. Probably because of how far back they dated or because of someone's intentionality. Whichever, his soulscape was larger than he usually surmised, and he had more than enough hands to erect the magnificent edifice of the forge, even in the searing heat of the volcano. The three humans definitely did not have it easy. Monsters at the very least would have built and still over time build some semblance of resistance by being exposed over time. But humans, their skin was so fragile. Being a drifter could have helped increase its durability, but it was still a far cry from a monster's durability. After returning, Northern spent a few minutes sleeping. The talent fragments were still flowing in, although slowed and inconsistent with sometimes 10-20 minutes between. Which meant their battle in the dungeon was getting tougher. His summons were getting closer to the depth of the dungeon where they would have to defeat the 20th floor boss. This time he had no interest in helping them. He was also sure that they would win. All 12 of them were more than enough. During lunch, Northern heard something shocking. Aster came to him, sitting beside him with his plate of grilled steak and veggies. He did not bother glancing at the food. Immediately he turned to Northern and said, "Did you hear about it? The second team to come out of the rift." Northern's eyes twitched a little bit. He then tried to hide his interest with a straight look on his face. "Is it the council president?" "No." At that point, hiding did not work anymore. He swung his eyes wide open. "What do you mean no?" "I had the same reaction." Aster smiled interestingly. The smile was very unpleasant to Northern, but what could he do? The chatterbox had got him good with this one. "It's some kiddo from the Middle East of the Central Plains. The Keyjar clan." "Keyjar clan?" "Yes. But usually, the J is pronounced silent, almost like H, ku, jar. Do you have a death wish?" Aster swallowed, his voice cut off by Northern's piercing eyes. He turned away and picked his fork, sluggishly prickling the utensils on the tender slab of meat. "So, who are these Keyjar clan people?" Northern pronounced correctly this time, the J sounding with a silent hiss. Aster beamed immediately, strange joy finding its way to his heart, his former expression disappearing completely. "There are majorly 7 clans that rule the Central Plains, either with their achievements in history or their individual strength." He spoke with hand gestures, showing Northern his 7 fingers. "The first and foremost, strongest of them all, you have probably heard of them plenty of times. The Kageyama clan." Northern's voice came with a cold and detached tone. "You are correct, but why do you sound so hateful?" Aster looked at him weirdly for barely a millisecond, then continued. "After the Kageyama clan, there's the Ashura clan. The Ashura clan is the greatest when it comes to hand-to-hand combat mastery. Many even say that at a point in time they could stand toe-to-toe with the Kageyama clan until their patriarch, who was a paragon at the time, died. They've had 3 generations of patriarchs now and none of them had been able to become paragons, while the Kageyama keep producing paragons after paragons for patriarch. He closed down his 3rd finger. The 3rd strongest is the Kijar clan. They are only 3rd because of the same reasons as the Ashura clan, but I heard that they have a mysterious heart due to their heritage abilities. It makes them a very deadly clan. The 4th is their sister clan known as the Bison clan. A clan made purely of tender and lithe girls that are very swift and shadowy, always lurking in the shadows, blending perfectly into the night with their brown skin. The chatterbox paused for a minute, looking away with a soft blush on his cheek. I wish to marry into that place one day. Northern looked at him indifferently, boringly. The 5th. He jerked back to reality and closed down another finger. That will be the Johnson clan. Finally! Northern had been expecting when Ryan's clan was going to fit into the ranking. He had in fact expected it to be the 2nd or 3rd. Because judging from the brute and unfair talent that the ignorant child had, his clan had to have been very ferocious in and of themselves. Sadly, Northern knew little to nothing about them. Even when he tried looking into them, information brokers placed too high a fee on details regarding them. He either couldn't afford it or they wouldn't tell him except he had something of equal value to offer. Aster leaned in closer, whispering, I heard they worship a chalice of cold flame. Like, literal cold flame. It's a fire that freezes instead of burning. And if the flame goes out, their flames would never be able to burn again. Northern frowned slightly, making the chatterbox wince back a little bit. Of course, you can just see it as rumors. In the end, believe whatever you want to. But that was not the case. Ah, that's why. Chapter 738. The Clans. Back then, Ryan had reacted outrageously because he was called a crappy son of ice. Northern had thought the issue was the crappy, but Ryan's response addressed the fact that he was not a son of ice, but a son of cold flame, and did not seem concerned about the crappy. Now hearing about his family's ties to a strange chalice of cold flame, it just made so much sense. Although he could not entirely ascertain the genuineness of the information, it seemed more like a rumor. But he knew a semblance of it was true. He continued to listen to Aster. The 6th and 7th are not much big deal. They all joined different kingdoms and became part of their nobility system. I suspect that even Kijar and Bison would most likely join another kingdom or form one of their own. Northern gave Aster a deep, serious, and confused look. You suspect? Aster glanced at him and let out a strange laughter, scratching the back of his neck. I just go off saying nonsense sometimes. I guess I really am a chatterbox like you say. Ah! He laughed for a couple more awkward minutes, but Northern's deep eyes did not let him off the hook. They seemed to be digging beyond his eyes. Before he could say anything, however, Northern averted his eyes. So these guys, they are from the Kijar clan. Who are they exactly? Aster was silent for a bit. He began to tear his steak with the fork in his hands. They are twins and are referred to as the prodigy twins of the clan. Although they are just nomads, their combat experience and talent class alone places them on a different level amongst the whole school. It is understandable why someone of their caliber was the second to finish. Even though they were not able to kill the Rift Guardian. Of course. They were not able to kill the Rift Guardian? Northern's tone betrayed a bit of disappointment. Aster waited until he had done chewing before he responded, gesturing with the fork in his hands. Of course they were not. I am sure none of the instructors expected us to actually defeat the Rift Guardian. Usually, to defeat a rift in total, it will take no less than a week. He paused abruptly, thinking for a bit. What am I even saying? A Tier V rift would have caused no less than 3 weeks. And you finished it in 30 minutes. Think about it, Rian. Isn't it crazy? Northern indeed thought for a bit. The chatterbox was kind of right. His first rift had not come that easy, and he spent a lot of months in it. Moreover, it was Tier V. But there was a problem with that rift. It wasn't like the others. The kingdom of red mines was leaked to other rifts, which caused territorial war every now and then. It was defective, but still, a rift of Tier V cannot be easily defeated in 30 minutes. It was very difficult for any experienced drifter to believe. A Paragon can of course solo a Tier V rift if they tried, but not in 30 minutes. And monsters were a very volatile phenomenon. Calculating the odds were not enough. An unexpected variable could rise from nowhere and turn the tables around. This was the main reason why Paragons and Ascendants don't go around soloing rifts even though they probably could. And to do so would take no less than 1 week, because they would need to rest, replenish their strength, and strategize to fight only with their advantage. But none of that was applicable to this phenomenon called Rian. Aster stared at him for a few seconds, prompting Northern to frown uncomfortably. What? He shook his head, taking another bite of steak into his mouth and speaking with it. I really don't understand you. What are you? Northern did not respond to the boy's curiosity. Instead, he focused on his food. After he was done, he put away his plate and decided to take some free time to himself, stepping out of the mansion to see what the main city actually looked like. Taking permission to go out was a long process. The instructors wanted to have full oversight over the safety of each student. But for some reason, it was relatively easy for him. At first, they started whispering to each other's ears. Northern did not know what the deal was, but it looked like the instructors recognized him of some sort. It wouldn't be because of that, would it? If he knew it was going to cause this much hassle, maybe he would have pretended to stay a little bit longer in the rift. However, Northern detested the thought of pretending. His days of pretense were over. Now, anyone that was uncomfortable with his strength could just scram. Besides, it was not like he was going to go after everyone and have them at their throats or demand their heads. To be honest, he didn't even consider them in all of his plans. After the need to deal with one single person, the next agenda on his mind was Riemgard. After Riemgard, the underworld. Except if threats beyond mortal dealings were to suddenly reveal themselves. Even at that, he was not some hero. If he didn't need to, he wouldn't. At last, they gave him permission, but not without a curfew. Northern was to make it back to the mansions before 9 p.m. or else there would be penalties waiting for him. And so he departed to the city. The capital city of Verialania was a beautiful place to behold. Of course, the high roofs and spired edges gave the city a common religious edge. But the thing about them was that they weren't that religious. Of course, every nation was committed to a constellation body. And in the center of Certlia Street, Northern could see a small statue of a bird-like creature that resembled an eagle. Isn't that a griffin? It had 4 limbs and hind limbs, eyes sharp as if piercing into one's soul. The sculpture perfectly smooth and clean, almost looking too realistic. Beneath the eagle-like creature was a fountain. 2 ladies were seated on the round edge of the fountain's basin, discussing casually, the soft luminescence of the day star falling on their amber skin. From the looks of it, they were undoubtedly nobility. The water was clear, softly radiating the glow of the day star's light as it poured. Northern could clearly see the coins that had been tossed into the water at the depth of the basin. He drifted his head back to the eagle, muttering, "Matinis." Then he continued his walk, turning to the right of the alley to lead him to another street. Somewhere behind the alley, 2 men pressed themselves against the wall and watched him go forward, their eyes glinting with a wicked light, and they smiled eerily through the corner of their mouths. Chapter 739. Damsel in Distress. Northern, with the help of the spirit linen, was clothed in a simple yet dashing attire, a complicated weave of white and black cloth, tailored to perfection. The ensemble was secured with a sturdy belt at the waist, adding a sense of readiness to his look. Over this, a large black hooded cloak was draped, its flowing fabric blending seamlessly with the outfit beneath. His arms were wrapped in bandages, giving a rugged touch to the refined look. Carefully, Northern walked forward. He had a rough idea of where he was going. Besides, before reaching the fountain he had already asked. Some people had informed him that finding craftsmen was not difficult. They had even guessed that he was a foreigner from the way he asked. Most of the time, a certain street was always known to craftsmen. They chose a place to be prominent in. Whether it was a blacksmith, a builder, a jeweler, even down to a pawn shop, everything trading and making could be found in Diril Street, which was down to the right after the Martini's fountain. Noticing an overhead wooden arch in front of him, he glanced up a little and read silently. Diril, the Union of the Strong. He did not give much thought to what it could mean. He did not want to concern himself with such useless things at such a crucial moment. Northern stopped just in front of the signboard and turned to his left, entering into an isolated alley. Despite the brightness of the day, the place was heavily darkened by shadows, almost deceiving one to think night was at hand. Entering the alley, he was assaulted by a poignant dirty odor that caused him to wrinkle his nose a bit. Piles of garbage littered the left and right walls of the alley. Northern's eyes glinted coldly as he continued to walk deeper into the dark maws of the alley. I wonder if this is deep enough. He looked around. The alley still went further, almost like the thin and narrow throat of a colossal monster. For him, however, this much was enough. He had no intention to see for himself how deep the alley went. He was only here because he wanted to give some folks the chance they were desperately looking for. Northern sighed, his eyes, from beneath the hooded darkness, tracing to his right side. Swiftly, a dagger curved over his neck and a low, gruff voice sounded. If you don't want to lose your precious life, bring out every darn coin in your pocket. Northern was silent for a little bit. Then he spoke, his voice calm and indifferent. I don't walk around carrying coins. Aside from the fact that they are heavy, there's a smart way to deal with money these days. Northern's tone was a stark contrast to how the response had played out in their heads. The man holding the knife behind Northern expressed a little confusion but immediately straightened his face and frowned. Then what are the valuables you have? Bring them out. He pressed the knife against Northern's throat, slightly touching his skin. At least that was what he felt as he pressed the knife. Northern was silent, unmindful of the pressure that the man was intending to exert. Then his voice came. I have a question for you both. The second man, a little bit farther from the first, flinched. He had stayed farther to keep watch while his comrade committed the atrocity. The boy had not turned back. They did not give him a chance to, it was part of the plan. So, how did he know there were two of them? He frowned, slightly shivering. The boy's voice continued before he could say anything. Let's say, I was bigger, larger, more imposing than this slightly tall and lithe body. Would you still consider me a target? The man pressed the knife even tighter, reinforcing his voice. Just shut your mouth and hand over all your valuables. That does not suffice for an answer. You could have just said yes or no. The man afar watched suspiciously, his frown growing deeper. I think the human mind is more oriented towards weakness than it is towards strength. You see an easy mark and you pounce. Northern continued, his voice calm but carrying an eerie weight. You think you've calculated every risk, every angle. But what happens when your prey turns out to be something else entirely? The man holding the knife sneered, trying to mask his growing unease. Enough with your riddles. I don't care if you're a giant or a twig. Give me what I want, or I'll carve it out of you. Northern tilted his head slightly, the shadow of his hood shifting to reveal just a glint of his eyes, sharp, piercing, and impossibly steady. Interesting. Even with the doubt crawling up your spine, you still choose to push forward. The second man, standing farther down the alley, swallowed hard. Something about this boy, no, this presence, was off. He had been in countless robberies, but this was the first time he felt like the predator had become the prey. And no more talking. The second man shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Jaren, just end him already. Northern sighed softly. So predictable. Before any of them could react, something very swiftly dropped from the height of the alley. Its form was blurry. Northern narrowed his eyes with a displeased frown as the form blew past him, their cloak flying into the air. A slender and beautiful hand grabbed the man by the wrist. It was like he suddenly was held by iron. He tried forcing his hand out, at least wanting to slash the boy's throat, but the grip was too strong. The man's face contorted with pain as he struggled against the vice-like grip. His knife hand trembled, veins bulging as he poured all his strength into freeing himself. But it was futile. Northern turned slightly, his expression impassive as he observed the scene. The figure stepped forward, their movements fluid yet deliberate, exuding a quiet authority that even the shadows seemed to respect. The second man froze in place, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but his body refused to move. The air in the alley grew heavier, charged with an energy he couldn't comprehend. The figure's voice cut through the silence, calm yet firm, carrying an edge that sent shivers down their spines. "You've made a grave mistake." It was a woman's voice, smooth but with a steel-like undertone. With a swing of her hand, she rendered her figure from the cloak, sending it flying into the air. Long, flowing blonde hair cascaded down like a golden river, its radiant sheen almost banishing the surrounding shadows with an incandescent glow. Her piercing blue eyes, both captivating and unyielding, seemed to hold a quiet authority, framed by stern, determined features that commanded the attention and submission of all who dared to look. She stood before Northern, stretching out a long thin sword. "I hate guys who prey on the weak." Chapter 740. The Dismissive Encounter. The first man, Jaren, was lying helplessly on the ground, groaning painfully and holding his broken hand. The other man's backward steps suggested that he was preparing to flee, but his eyes, grim with confusion, shifted between the girl standing and the man on the ground. He seemed to finally resolve himself to abandon his partner. He gritted his teeth and made a run for it. Running after attempting robbery. How stupid. The lady shifted one leg backward and ran forward, almost flashing across the distance, her legs swift, competing with the wind. Reaching the man's position, she rolled across, carrying her body with angelic grace. She landed on the man, a powerful kick slamming over his head. Blood spurted out of his nose and mouth, his eyes rolled back, and his weakened legs dropped to their knees. He collapsed and completely passed out. The lady, confidence brimming in her face, turned around, intending to check if the guy was okay, but he just casually walked past her, going out of the alley. At first, she widened her eyes. His steps had been so light that she did not anticipate him coming, even when he was so close to her. But she frowned almost immediately after realizing that was not the point. She turned and chased after the boy, catching up to him and pulling his cloak. Northern grimaced a little bit, looking down at her hand as he turned. "What?" The lady winced back a little, eyes widened. Then she glowered at him. "I just saved you, and not even a word of thanks." Northern shook his head, his expression cold. "You did not save me. You saved them." He glanced over at the two men who now lay unconscious. Then he shifted his eyes back to the lady. He was slightly taller than her, so he did not need to look up, nor particularly down, to address her. "But anyway, you did good. I don't care. But if there were more people like you, I guess this world would be a less terrible place." Northern turned around to leave, but the lady hastily came in front of him. "What is this? Something is wrong with the way you address me." She couldn't quite tell, but Northern's tone was not right. "I am not demanding to be worshipped or anything, but isn't it common sense to be grateful if you were saved?" Northern lingered, his gaze from beneath the hood coldly piercing into her. "Only someone in distress would be grateful. I had it under control." He paused, causing the air between the two of them to grow heavy. "You are contradicting yourself. You don't expect to be worshipped, but you expect a thank you? At the end of the day, you want to get a medal of honor of some sort for what you have done. For whom do you do it then? Don't tell me you are an advocate of justice, that just does it for the sake of it." Northern's tone grew slightly venomous, and the lady's expression became dark and angry. "I'm sorry. Do we have an unresolved dispute before? Meeting another raven disgusts me. I want nothing to do with her." Northern stayed silent for a beat before he eventually said, "I'm sorry if I sounded rude. Thank you." Then he continued walking. The lady's angry face only got angrier as she watched him walk away. She couldn't tell what exactly that was, but it was as if the boy had a grudge towards her. She shook her head and sighed. Kids these days, Their parents should put more effort into their education. She also walked towards the exit of the alley where Northern had headed, but at a slower pace. She did not want to have anything to do with such a spoiled brat. If not, there was no telling what methods of discipline she might employ. After a couple of minutes, Northern got to a pawnshop. The place was bloated with the smell of old paper and antiques. It was a small shop, narrow inwards with a peeling leather couch for customers to rest to one side of the wall. Opposite. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.